ออกเลยออก Yes, yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to this evening's meeting of the Planning Committee of Wokingham Borough Council on Wednesday, 10th of January. I'm Councillor David Cornish and I will chair the meeting. Before I go on to the kind of formal introduction that I make at every meeting, given the level of interest in tonight's meeting, which is considerable, I thought it might be appropriate to add a few further words of introduction just to explain who's in the room and why. There are generally 4 different groups of people in a planning committee meeting. Firstly, there are you, members of our community, and I'd like to say thank you very much indeed to everybody here, those in the council chamber and those reduced to standing room only, for taking the time and trouble to come out on a cold evening. Planning is not a democratic exercise in itself, but it's important that residents make their opinions known, as I know you all have done through the consultation process. So thank you for coming to be here and caring enough to put the time in. Having said which, you are here to watch, but not to participate. And I need to be clear about that. There are some people who are here to speak and they'll be called at the appropriate time, but the rest of you are here to watch and observe. Secondly, we have the council officers who are here. And I'd like to emphasise that these folks are professionals who do a very tough job on behalf of us all. And contrary to what some people may think, they're not here to try and sell the idea of a development proposal. Their job is to balance the pros and cons of an application according to local and national policy and give us the best professional advice that they can to this committee. You may not like what they have to say, but it's important that their professional advice is heard, and I must ask everyone to listen to them with respect. Third, there's ourselves, who are your elected members. Our job is to question and double check the officer's recommendation and exercise our own judgment as elected representatives based on the evidence that's put before us. We're not professionals ourselves, but we probably know a bit more about the planning process than the average member of the public. Most of us have probably at some point sat where all of you are now, maybe opposing or speaking in favour of an application. And we do understand the frustrations with the way that you'll have with the way the planning system can sometimes operate. We do have the power to decide against the officer's advice, but we have to take great care in doing so, showing clear and justifiable reasons for our decisions. And that is because of the 4th group, who you can't see in the room, but they do dominate this process, and that is the government and the planning inspectorate. National planning policy governs the way the planning system operates in England, and as much as we all may sometimes wish to, we cannot ignore it. If we make decisions that we cannot correctly justify, they risk being overturned at an appeal, and that has real consequences both for the council and for you, our residents. In extremis, the government could take away our right to manage our own planning process. So no matter how many people turn up to watch us, we must run this committee process correctly, otherwise we as a community all end up losing out. So I would emphasise that we've got 9 elected borough councillors here and there's a variety of professional officers. This isn't a political meeting, it's a quasi-judicial committee which forms part of the planning process, and as I've just explained, it has very formal set procedures which we have to follow. Firstly, the planning officer will present the application, and then only those speakers who've registered to speak will be invited to address the committee. There is a strict time limit of 3 minutes per category of speaker, and those categories are town and parish councils, objectors, supporters and borough members affected by the application. Members of the committee are more impressed by the quality of what you say rather than how long you speak for. But above all, I must ask those who are going to speak to please stay within your time limits. Everyone, all of you here, have had the opportunity to comment on each application through the consultation process. And no one else, other than those speakers I've identified, so no one else, including borough councillors, town and parish councillors, agents, applicants, objectors or supporters, are permitted to address the committee, ask questions or to disrupt the meeting. Following the speakers, members of the committee will discuss and debate each application and seek clarification from the council's professional planning officers in order to reach a decision. The decision reached by the committee may or may not agree with that recommended by the presenting officer. It is important to understand that the committee can only determine the actual planning application presented before it using those current national and local planning policies and relevant decisions of the relevant planning inspectorate. We cannot consider whether or not the application is a good idea, whether it is needed, whether it is too costly, whether there are alternative uses for the site or more suitable uses of land elsewhere. And I'm afraid nor can we consider whether or not they are popular with residents. I'm afraid none of those things can count in our decision. Finally, this is a hybrid meeting with committee members present in the room, while some officers are attending in person and some are connecting via Microsoft Teams. The meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. If you are joining us remotely, please ensure that your camera is switched on only when you are speaking and that your microphone is unmuted only when you are speaking. Madeline, do we have any apologies for absence? No apologies for absence, thank you. Agenda item 55 is the minutes of the previous meeting, which was the 13th of December 2023. Does any committee member have any questions about the accuracy of the minutes? No? Can I have someone nominate those minutes as being an accurate record of the meeting? Tony, thank you. Someone to second? Stuart, thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest for any agenda items for this evening's meeting? No declaration of interest? Okay. Are there any applications? Are there any applications to be deferred and withdrawn items? Right, in which case we move to the first application on the agenda, which is agenda item 58, application 223691, Lee Spring, Latimer Road, Wokingham. Ben, I think it's over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is application, let's have a better start, shall we? Application 223691 to Lee Spring at 10 to 12 Latimer Road in Wokingham. Now, this is the full application for 42 residential apartments in 3 different blocks A, B, and C, varying from 2 to 4 stories. Now on site, you will see associated car parking. You will see shared amenity spaces, enhanced green spaces that promote biodiversity, and access for NISA local, access for the garages to the rear, to the north of the site. They will be fully retained via a 3.7 meter access path. So the application was previously deferred for a site visit, which was carried out by members and myself on the 5th of January 2024. Now, the reason for the deferral was to assess the bulk, mass, scale, and the car parking arrangements of the proposals, viewing it in the context of the application site. Speaking of which, the application site is shown on your screen right now. It's in the major development location of Wokingham, where growth is promoted. This is located circa 15 meters away from the defined town centre boundary, which is established in the 2010 SPD. To the south of the site, we have the Barkham Recreational Ground, and to the north of the site, most notably, we have the Wokingham train station and bus station. So, as we discussed last time, which we shan't go into too much detail on, it is as sustainable as locations can get for development. So the existing site is home to a rather architecturally uninspiring commercial building, as evidenced on site. So these images on the screen now, this shows the existing building, which is a 2 to 3 story commercial building with mixed B and E classes. To the top of the screen, you'll be able to see the rear of the existing building. These views are from Queen's Gate, which says opposite, and it shows some of the antisocial behavior occurring on site, and members also witnessed some fly tipping and graffiti on site as well. To the bottom of your screen, you see the outlook from Wellington Road, and to the bottom right, you can see the existing parking court. So further to the demolition of the existing building, the site layout is shown here. Now, this is 42 residential apartments, all of which comply in the vast excess meet minimum space standards, so they provide a high quality internal amenity. The sections are shown here, which shows the existing buildings at the top of your screen in proportion to surrounding development, with the proposal being shown to the bottom of your screen. This aerial CGI shows how the proposal will integrate into its surroundings, creating a new character area and nicely blending the built form and vernacular of Wokingham Town Centre into the residential development along Barkham Road. This is a street scene shot, which shows the perspective, almost flowing at 2 people's height, let's say, and that shows the overall form and also the public domain and realm. This is the most prominent viewpoint, as is shown in CGI. So this is from Wellington Road. It is a backland site, so it's very difficult to gauge its scale. Other than the little oblique view we saw from Latimer Road and this view, the site is very much not overly prominent. To prove that point, we have the view from the Barkham Recreational Ground, which is shown here. Only very oblique views are shown with the level of foliage currently on site. The recommendation is to grant approval subject to the conditions and informatives listed within Appendix 1 of my committee reports. The completion of an associated S106 legal agreement and the heads of terms are listed within the recommendation. And given this is a three-tiered recommendation, should, in the unlikely event the S106 not be signed within a period of 6 months, we request authorization to refuse the application. Thank you very much.
Ben, thank you very much for that. We have two people speaking on this application. The first is Councillor Keith Mulvin from Wokingham Town Council, who is in the room and I think speaking to object. Keith, you'd like to come up to the table? And just remind you, you do have 3 minutes.
Chair, you and I hope I won't use it all. Can I start off with pleased to see so many people here. Practically filled the place, which is a great achievement. I thought it would be busy, but you filled it. Thank you, Chair. I'm here to speak on behalf of Wokingham Town Council about this site. Unfortunately, I have not been able to attend the previous meetings in person due to operational difficulties. But I think you yourself, Chairman, have already made the comment that one of the best things about the process of planning is that it's an open thing. I attended the site visit on whatever day it was, on Friday, and when I saw you visit, I saw what you saw. And I repeat what the Town Council have put in a written objection, as many other people have done. In the case of the Town Council, the major reason for objection was on the total lack of affordable housing being provided. I mean, we look to, you referred earlier on to government policy, and I quote from Homes England fact sheet 9, it's the wheels, sorry, that says affordable housing is a key element of the government's plan to end the housing crisis, tackle homelessness, and provide aspiring homeowners with a step onto the housing ladder, hopefully a safe step onto a ladder, always a risk. But it seems to me that that is a grand vision, that this proposal fails to meet. The report, which is, I hope I had it in my hand, but I don't, is a weighty document and starts with a suggestion of 13 affordable homes might have been appeared if they could be if that was a viable option. Now, obviously, when people enter into the planning process, they have their own ideas about what is physically possible and what is otherwise possible. But the best that the recommendation comes up with is a late stage affordable housing deferred payment. No homes, but a small amount of money sometime in the future. How has it come to this? And that is a question that I leave for the 8 men, 1 woman who form this committee. You can practice on this one. Later this evening, you have another application where affordable houses are being provided, the Woolwich application. And of course, I take
I'm going to have to ask you to close there because we are very tight for time this evening.
I'm out of time.
You are out of time, so I'm afraid.
But not in ever. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Keith. We now have Grant Leggett, who's the agent speaking on behalf of the application. And Grant, you are online.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
You also have 3 minutes, and I will be sharp on that tonight. Thank you.
I shan't take all of the 3 minutes, but thank you again, Chair, for the opportunity to speak tonight on this application. As I've already said, I don't plan to speak for very long at all. I think the officer's report and the presentation tonight have more than adequately covered the matters that led to the deferral from the previous committee, and we endorse those findings completely. I understand members have now visited the site and now have a stronger appreciation of the context and the nature of the development. being a
Sorry,
tiered
Grant,
development.
Grant, can I interrupt you briefly? We're having some considerable difficulty in the room actually hearing you. I don't know whether that's a technical issue at your end or ours. I suspect it's not here. Would you like to try again?
Better? Oh my
That
goodness,
sounds a
I'm
bit
so
better.
sorry.
Yeah,
I'm going to have to
okay.
start again.
Yeah, if you
Uh,
can, that'd be fine. We'll restart the clock.
Forgive me, I know you are pressed for time tonight, and the first thing I said was I don't plan to take up much of your time, but here I go starting again. All I plan to say is that the officer's report and their presentation tonight has, in our opinion, more than adequately covered the matters that led to deferral from the previous committee. Members have now visited the site, and we understand have a better appreciation of the context and nature of this development, which is tiered back from 2 to 3 to 4 stories to its maximum height of 4 stories. And I think the visuals that the officer showed before were very informative in putting some context into the scale of the development. The other reason for deferral was due to issues raised by the NISA local business, but we understand they've now been resolved and that objection has been withdrawn. We have, of course, read the recent objections from Wokingham Town Council that the gentleman previously spoke to. It seems to me that all of those matters have been thoroughly addressed by officers in their report, and I don't plan to rehearse them here either. Although equally, I'd be very happy to weigh in on matters regarding affordable housing viability, something I think officers are perfectly well versed in. They will know paragraph 58 of the National Planning Policy Framework very well, and will be able to explain to you why viability is a material consideration in the delivery of affordable housing. In summary, quickly as I can be, this development provides a suite of benefits to Wokingham: delivery of housing, obviously, on a highly sustainable brownfield site, replacement of some very tired, architecturally void buildings with a high quality building that complies entirely with the Wokingham Design Guide and will enhance the area, a mix of units including 4-bed family sized units, improvements in highway conditions which your own officers agree would be a net betterment, sustainability benefits including carbon reductions, enhanced landscaping and biodiversity, as well as economic benefits including job creation during construction phase and expenditure generated by workers in households. And all of that, your policy officers agree, outweighs any imperative to retain the employment on the site, which they agree is no longer, or is now surplus to requirements. Accordingly, we agree with the officer's recommendation for approval, and we think permission should be granted. And I thank you again for your time.
Grant, thank you very much. Sorry, there's a technical issue.
Can I ask the email address info@precisionplumbingandheating.co.uk to turn off your camera because you're coming up as a big square on our screen?
Okay, thank you very much. I would remind committee, that's all the speakers on this particular application. I'd remind committee members that this is a deferred item, as I'm sure you're aware, and this was deferred on particular topics to do with bulk, scale, mass, access and parking arrangements. It was not deferred on grounds of social housing contribution or the viability of the financial viability of the site, and I do not propose that we reopen those topics. We must stick to the grounds for deferral. So does anybody wish to open the conversation on this? We've got Michael, then I have Rochelle.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, when we actually saw this on this particular site on the 5th of this month, I found it very, very valuable and extremely useful. And as we know, and as I had problems trying to park around there, and I parked some considerable distance from it, there's a lot of residents parking around there, lots of single yellow lines, double yellow lines. So I do find the issue of parking extremely important, because I think that's going to be a huge impact. And knowing what human nature is, there's going to be more cars wanting to park there than there are actually spaces. And where are the cars going to park? They're not going to park on the double yellow, single yellows. It's going to be forced out more from there. And that's on top of the bulk issues as well. So I'm just really wondering if if officers could give a bit more detail about parking, because I think what's going to happen is there could be more cars than there are spaces on what's going to happen then.
Thank you, Michael. We've conditioned a parking management plan which will be strictly enforced, and that is a very simple way of answering the question. If anybody is parked on site that should not, they will be enforced against. This works exactly the same as a CPZ, which is occurring in the residential neighborhoods, as you kindly outlined. If somebody's parking there that shouldn't be, they will receive a ticket. Now, in terms of further management, with the 7 car for units, we acknowledge there are 7 car for units, which we view as a benefit in line with Wokingham Town Centre car parking standards. Their lease will explicitly state that they will not own a car. Now, in times of visitors, for example, I think, which is the reason members requested a car parking analysis for capacity within Wokingham Town Centre. Now, we unfortunately only had the data for the council ran car parks, but that provides a really nice indication, and it creates assumptions that this is adequate without the private car parks, which amass almost exactly the same amount of spaces again. So there is spare capacity. There is upwards of 20% spare capacity at the most peak time across Wokingham. So where it could be material to residential uses, the most important part here is that 1 in 5 car parking spaces in council run car parks will be available at the busiest of times. So there are parking options in Wokingham Town Centre, even though policy officers, members, we're trying to incentivize against the modal shift towards car use rather away from it. Thank you.
Can I come back on that? Yeah, I do note about the 7 car free units. That's on page 51, item 118 of the agenda. And I'm glad you covered the item about visitors, because I wrote visitors down. But what also concerns me as well, as a lot of people now use online shopping, when you've got Asda and you've got Sainsbury's and Tesco's and whatever it is, where are they going to park around there? I think they're going to have a heck of a job to try and do their business around there safely and not blocking roads. So that I know they're not going to be there for like hours. It's probably there for about, could be 10 minutes, something like that. But that's going to be an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. Now, given the transient nature of delivery vehicles, they are not there for a significant period of time. So by the same logic, anyone who lives in a single access cul-de-sac, for example, they would be subject to exactly the same thing. If they were parked there for hours on end, I see issues arising. Frankly, if they are parked away and there is sufficient space on site where they could park and deliver by hand, that's absolutely reasonable. That will be no worse off than any other standard arrangement due to their temporary nature.
Yeah, I could see that going down a lead balloon with these companies,
Yeah.
but never mind.
Yeah, well, I think as we proceed this evening, I'm going to say to everybody, ask a question, have a comeback question, and then we'll move on and return to you towards the end of the session if you have more questions. Before I move on to Michelle, who was next, I should have made a note for the record of who made the site visits. And it was all members of the committee with the exception of Councillor Sohn and Councillor Shepherd-Dubey. Yeah. Yeah. Michelle, your question.
Yes, I'm just curious about the biodiversity and how significant it's going to be. I will use the context of the fact that I was at a wildlife refuge this week and in another country, and there was a significant amount of biodiversity there. I'm just curious how much it's going to be compared to what we find in other places.
Thank you. Now, in terms of a formal biodiversity net gain metric, this has not been submitted. We'll start seeing a lot more of those as we know, as the Environment Act comes to be a statutory mechanism for achieving that. Now, notwithstanding, considering the fact that the site at the moment, to paraphrase, is a concrete jungle as such, there's very little vegetation on site. Now, the applicant is kind of providing some semi-natural green space with the retention of the TPO to the south of the site. We have amenity space, green space to the north of the site. We have eco-mosaic roofs. There are enhancements. We cannot put a figure on it. We cannot say the biodiversity metric says X. We can't do that. But given the fact that there is very little opportunity currently for any biodiversity whatsoever, there are going to measures to improve that, which is concurred by WBC Ecology, who support the application.
Could I possibly ask, is it also going to be animals as well as birds, etc., rodents, something like this? Or what will we find as opposed to just plants? And
So it's more about the environment that we're creating by providing things like eco-mosaic roofs. Is the environment we're creating by having semi-natural green space in urban locations. Notwithstanding the fact that there are not very many species on site at the moment, we do have bats, and they're making very, very large measures to protect them, to enhance their dark corridor, and to provide opportunities for them. So I cannot give you an exhaustive list of every animal you might see there in a year, but no, it will provide great opportunities for them to thrive. Thank you.
Wayne?
Yes, I would just like to touch on Keith's point, because I think he's being a bit unjust to us in terms of we could use tonight as an example of going on affordable housing. We have on this committee on a number of occasions, and I've brought one application back 3 times in Sonning when they said it wasn't viable. But we are where we are. There's very little we can do, and I think, you know, the rules are that they're allowed to make 20%, and they go through this process where we check it, they check it. It's signed off independently. We don't like it, but we are where we are. So I thought we just need to pick that one up for clarification. As I asked for the site visit, I think we've got to be realistic here. This is a brownfield site. This is where we should be building, and not on greenfield sites. I was concerned about the bulk mass scale and all of that. That's hence the reason why I put forward a site visit. But ongoing there, the site is in a pretty sad mess, and I think this will tidy it up. So I think the site visit was very useful.
Anyone else wish to speak? I'll just add my comments at the end, just to absolutely endorse what Wayne's just said. My concern was over the access for deliveries to the local shop. That was more than assuaged during the site visit. We have had concerns about where people are going to park, but we'll have other applications come before us about creating extra traffic. So we can't have it both ways. This is a cast iron example of a great brownfield development in a very sustainable position. We've complained about greenfield developments in the past. We'll do it in the future. Who knows? It might even come up again tonight. So I wonder if we were to refuse this application, I'm not entirely certain what we'd ever accept. So I have to say that I definitely support the application. Does anybody wish to comment further? In which case, I'm going to call for a vote.
Need a proposal.
So we need a proposer. And my right-hand man here reminds me, we need a proposer. Wayne, does someone to second? I've got Al to second.
Revised recommendation.
And it's on the revised I'll read out the revised recommendation, which is that the committee authorises the grant of planning permission subject to the following 3-tiered recommendation: completion of a legal S106 agreement to secure the following heads of terms, which is a My Journey or travel plan and a car cup contribution. So that's been proposed by Wayne. It's been seconded by Al. Those in favour? I think that's a unanimous yes. Okay. Thank you very much for those who've attended on behalf of that particular application. If there are any in the room who were here for that purpose and now wish to leave, please feel free to do so, or you're equally welcome to stay. Okay. The next item is agenda item 59, which is application 180711 Amen Corner, which is largely in Binfield, Bracknell, and which we as a borough have a small but not to be disregarded interest. Yeah, we'll take just a second to set up. Stephanie, you there? I'll hand over to Stefan.
Thank you, Chair. This is application 180711, which is a hybrid application for a residential-led planning application for mixed-use development comprising an outline application for commercial development on a 0.95 hectare site, all matters reserved except for access, and a full application for 302 residential dwellings, public open space, spine road, estate roads, landscaping, drainage, levels and car parking. It should, however, be noted that the application crosses the borough boundary between Wokingham and Bracknell Forest. In these circumstances, the applicant is required to submit identical applications to each local planning authority. However, only part of the development within Wokingham is within Wokingham, and this is an area of public open space. This is the location plan, and I've drawn on there the borough boundary. Again, I've shown the borough boundary on here. So the area within Wokingham is the public open space, and the rest of the development is in Bracknell. Bracknell Forest resolved in August 2023 to approve the scheme. The borough boundary is shown in the middle of this slide. The open space currently consists of scrubland and woodland. Here's a closer view of the proposed open space. And this is an overhead image of the site at present. Here's a closer view. The chairman asked me to clarify some cycle routes for you, as Wokingham Town Council, have queried the cycle access to the site. I can confirm that a cycle path has been implemented along London Road, both within Bracknell and Wokingham, as shown by the arrows. The arrows on there show where the crossing is over the Coppet Beach roundabout. So there is a cycle route all the way into Wokingham Town. And here are just a couple of images, as we haven't been on site to show where the cycle route is. The application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions listed in the report and planning obligations. I have included an additional obligation, which is not in the officer report or supplementary agenda. The applicant has agreed to provide a financial contribution to upgrade the surface of footpath 34, which runs from the southeastern corner of the site, in conjunction with their upgrading footpath 37. Which is shown on this slide. So they've agreed to upgrade footpath 34 as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Stefan. Does any member of the committee have any questions or comments about this? I've got Rochelle first and then Michael.
I'm just curious if Woking residents will be able to use that site for events or something like this, or would they have to apply to Wokingham or Bracknell to use it? Since some of the land will be in Wokingham, but the site majority is in Bracknell.
The planning application simply refers to the change of use to public open space. It doesn't cover, and it's an unrelated issue as to whether Wokingham residents can use it for open space. There is a planning obligation to secure it to be open in perpetuity for Wokingham residents, though.
Yeah, thank you. I just got a couple of questions, really. More out of curiosity, I think. Bracknell Forest, as you quite rightly said, approved the application back in August 2023, which is on page 26, item 4 of this agenda. I just really want to know, why did it take so long for this to come before this committee when Bracknell Forest approved it some 5 months ago?
We have to ensure that we deal with these applications correctly. And in terms of the cross-boundary nature of the application, we've had to have discussions with Bracknell as to exactly how we should be laying out the decision notice, correctly laying out conditions, and I've had to negotiate with Bracknell as to how we word our conditions, which has taken some time.
Thank you for that. I just really hoping I made this sort of similar comment before, that the agenda could reflect that. That would be great. I just also, you made reference to the financial contribution. Are you able to say how much that is at this stage, or is it something that can come before this committee? I'm just saying because I don't know the answer.
The precise figure hasn't been agreed as of yet. I'll need to get that figure from the Public Rights of Way team as part of writing up the section 106.
Stefan, could you go back to the roundabout, please? Because I always thought that Amen Corner was in Hurst Parish, not in Westcott. And why I'm saying that is I'm glad Mr. Bellinger's on, because if I need to call on his expert help, because there is another site that's connected to an open green space. So yeah, if you go back to that roundabout, sorry, no, you had a good aerial view of the roundabout. Yeah, so that traffic's taking you. So if you're going, I presume the arrow going across the roundabout, going towards the red dot in the top right hand corner. Where's Amen Corner on that map?
So the application site is here. I think the application to which you're referring is here.
Is it there? Okay.
Yeah.
So it's the other side of the. So my second question is, if this wasn't supported tonight, could Bracknell build those houses?
No.
Right. So what's in it for Woking Borough Council? Apart from upgrading a cycleway.
We have to assess the application that's before us, and we have not found any material harms related to the scheme. We are obviously particularly interested in the open space within our boundary, and the conditions are worded as such. But we would not have a strong case to refuse this application, considering that Bracknell consider it acceptable, unless you were to find some harms relating to the development on the Bracknell side.
No, I understand that, but to build on Rashal's point, no disrespect, Rashal, but that piece of land is in the middle of nowhere. You know, you're not going to traipse across the Copper Beach to get to it. You know, so that's more benefit to Bracknell. And I just hope that this council have worked out a financial settlement for that piece of land, because that piece of land is gold dust. And I hope they have the same support when the other side of the road comes, because as I understand it, they've always been objecting to that. So therefore, they can't have their cake and eat it. So I do hope the strategic team have taken that into account when they've been negotiating these areas.
I think I will say, Wayne, I have a sympathy for the sentiment you put forward. We are nonetheless restricted by process to discuss the application in front of us. And I'm sure the officers have heard what you say. We can't actually set conditions that we involve negotiations with other councils on financial matters. We had Al. I agree we do, but it does, but we also could tell by what we can actually do here. Yeah. Wayne, I'm going to move on. Al?
Yeah, I just want to thank Stefan for putting in footpath 34, because I mean, it's you say this isn't much use, this land, ways is pretty fat. So I mean, as a footpath, London Road, footpath 37, footpath 34, and Bracknell footpath 16, then lead over the railway through a tunnel and join up with all the sangs on the other side. So it's actually quite a key route to make the whole thing more coherent from a Bracknell point of view, possibly. But the footpath 34 is actually in Wokingham, so if the developers are going to help to upgrade that, and it's actually currently at the moment in pretty poor condition.
This is just curiosity, based on the fact that Wokingham is the lowest funded borough in the country. Who's going to be maintaining this? I know it's not a planning application, but I'd just like to see that Wokingham doesn't get stuck maintaining all this land if it's Bracknell land, really.
As far as I understand it, the land is really associated with the neighbouring estate in Bracknell, and it will be managed by a management company for the estate.
Do we have any further questions from anybody? No, therefore can I have a proposal that we either accept or decline the debt. So Tony, you're proposing we accept?
That's the additional.
Yeah, I think that's from Steven's point of view, the question of this additional section 106 money for the footpaths, which I think you noted at the start. Yeah. Do we have someone to second it? Al has seconded it. Can I have a vote for those in favour? Those against? Those abstaining? I think that's passed. I have to say, I thought that was going to be the quick and easy one, but what do I know? Right, we now move on to application agenda item number 60, which is application 230422, land west of Trowse Lane and north of Charlton Lane in Swallowfield. Before we start any discussion on this at all, I'm going to take the highly unusual step of leaving the meeting room for 2 minutes just to say good evening to the people who are clustered in considerable numbers in the main chamber of the council. So I can ask everyone to desist from any further conversation about this item until I get back, and I'm going to be escorted by Madeline to make sure that nothing unfortunate happens to me along the way. Including all committee members, there was one request from our friends and neighbours next door that it's sometimes difficult to hear what's going on in there. So if we can keep kind of background noise to a minimum in here, that would be greatly appreciated by those who are having to listen in remotely. The first person to speak regarding this application is Mr. Ian Fullerton from Swallowfield Parish Council, who is actually here. I beg your pardon. Sorry, I should just skip the presentations. I'll withdraw what I said, and I will pass on to Mark to carry on with the presentation from the council.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just upload my presentation. Thank you, Chairman. As on the screen, this is a full application for the proposed erection of 81 dwellings, including 40% affordable housing, open space, sustainable urban drainage systems, landscaping, biodiversity enhancements, new vehicular access off Charles Lane, and associated infrastructure. So this is an aerial photo with the site roughly outlined in red. You can see the woodlands to the south there. I'll show the location plan, which sets out the parameters of the site in more detail. This is the location plan you can see outlined in red here. Charles Lane is to the east, and then you've got Charlton Lane is to the south, just there. This is a slide just showing the development limits of Swallowfield. You can see in yellow there. The application site is just to the southwest. You can see there, and above it you can see you can probably make out there's a little notch in the village where there's an appeal decision which was allowed for 20 houses, which is currently being built out. So you can see how it relates to the settlement limits of Swallowfield just there. So this is the site layout plan. I'll come back to this in more detail in a moment, but it's just kind of just to show the parameters at this stage of where certain bits in development are going. And I'll just move on to some site photos. So starting with the top left, this is looking northward up Charles Lane, and you can just see the junction with Foxborough to the right-hand side. Moving to the top right, this is looking southwest down Charles Lane, and you can see the current speed restrictions there. And this is the proposed part of the road, which should be widened into a 2-lane carriageway. Bottom left is just slightly beyond those speeded signs, and this is sort of looking towards where the access would be further south down Charles Lane. And bottom right is just set further up Charles Lane, looking more or less towards the junction of Foxborough. So just moving on to some panoramics. This is the existing field access onto the site, and you can see sort of the general screening and the nature of the site there. These photos are a general sort of panoramic. So starting in the top left, this is looking southwards, stood just by the existing field access, and you can sort of see the tree belt of the woodland there. And it swings around looking southwest in the top right, and then in the bottom left, it's more looking west, and then in the bottom right, that's looking more sort of northwest. And you can just see some of the residential paraphernalia of one of the neighbouring gardens. So I believe that's Linwilg, I think is the correct pronouncement of that property. This is a panoramic stood in the southern part of the site, and this is looking back up to that residential property again. You can probably just see the gable ends there, and you can, in distance, you can probably maybe just see the sort of field boundary to Charles Lane as well. This is from Charlton Lane, and this is top one is looking northwards, and there's a field access to the south, which would have a footpath linking, so there'd be no vehicular access from this point. Again, you can just sort of see the property as well on Charles Lane there. And the bottom photograph is stood at the north looking southwards, and you can just see the woodlands and the general tree screening there as well. So these photographs are taken further to south down Charles Lane. So starting with the top one, this is looking back up to the site, and you can perhaps just see the southern edge of the woodlands there, and there's a junction with Charlton Lane, which you can't see from the top one. But the bottom photograph is moving up slightly further, and there you can see the junction between the two roads there, and you can see the woodland in the corner there. So moving on to some of the parameters of the application. So this is the new access and how it would be reconfigured. As set out in the report, part of Charles Lane would be widened to a 2-lane carriageway, and that would sweep into the application site. And then the single carriageway section of the road would have a sort of junction arm coming off of it. So the natural flow of the road would be sort of take you northwards along Charles Lane and into the site. This is the same site layout plan, but I thought I would just set that out here just because I'll be moving on to show you some of the parameters. So in the middle part, there's I'm not sure if the cursor's working, potentially. In the middle, there are 3 subspaces, and one in the middle one in the top right-hand corner and one in the bottom right-hand corner of the site. And these would have landscaping as well. You can see perhaps the play area would be in the southwestern part of the site, would sort of be in that corner near Charlton Lane. The development itself would have sort of a central loop road to it, and then sort of various cul-de-sacs coming off of it. These are some street scene drawings, and these ones would be the buildings and properties that would front onto the sort of central small green central green space, just to show that. And then these ones would show the buildings to the south and to the west, and you can just sort of see the spatial characteristics of them and how they would relate to each other. Just showing some dwelling types here. Generally, there's a mix between brick built and render. I'll sort of quickly show them. These are some other brick built ones, and here's ones with rendered features. They would generally have good detailing with string courses. You can see some brick patterns there. Some have open eaves. There's finial detailing on the gables, soldier arts detailing above the windows. Some have sort of leaded casement windows, and tile hanging as well. So generally the architectural vernacular, they have set out, they have looked at Swallowfield and taken sort of context of what the vernacular is in the area and replicate one, taken that forward to some of the properties.
And if I ask to start, can you please just listen to the officer's presentation with respect? Thank you.
And this is just a CGI aerial image, just showing the development. Obviously, this is not a plan for approval, but it's just to sort of show it in some kind of context. Sort of moving on from that, there are two conditions that weren't in the supplementary agenda, which officers would recommend. And that is one regarding the existing electricity lines, and that would be prior to commencement details of how the power lines will be routed, and a written agreement from the utility provider showing that would need to be submitted. That's something which is in the applicant's planning statement. It does set out what they intend to do. And the second one is the standard condition from Thames Water, that no development shall be occupied until necessary water upgrades are accommodated into the system. And just to reiterate, Thames Water didn't object, subject to that condition. So there would be two additional conditions, and I can give the precise wording to the clerk in terms of that. In terms of where we are and sort of how this has come about, as people are well aware, the council does have a housing and land supply shortfall, and therefore we are obliged to consider the application in paragraph 11 of the NPPF. And what that states is that in such circumstances, planning permission granted unless any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. So I think it's important to note that threshold sort of from the outset, that's what we're looking at, is that the adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. So moving forward, in the officer report, we notice outside assessment and contrary to the spatial strategy of the current development plan. However, it must be recognised that the most important policies are deemed out of date by the NPPF by reason of having a housing land supply shortfall. The planning policy team have not objected to the application. There has been discussion about the site being in the local plan updates. The site is an additional allocation within the revised growth strategy for 2021 for the local plan update. It was identified as potentially suitable in the most up-to-date HELA assessment with 2021. And the site is identified in sustainability appraisal in 2021 as a reasonable growth scenario to Swallowfield. Again, the officer report fully recognises that these are sort of high-level assessments. They're not the scrutiny of a planning application, and they do have limited weight in terms of where the local plan is, but nevertheless, they are material consideration to take into account. Moving on to landscape, there is harm. We fully recognise that in the report. The council's landscape officer has objected to the scheme based on that. The landscape and visual impact assessment submitted states that the harm would diminish to moderate, adverse, negligible and neutral impacts after 15 years. And that's a standard way that LVIAs are considered, is that the impact is assessed on day one and then it does a 15-year assessment after. And again, the planning policy team and the HELA assessment refer to the site as being well contained. So these are all factors that need to be weighed in the planning balance. In terms of highways, there's no objection from the council's highway officer, and we'll probably hear more on that, I'm sure. And I'll probably leave that there for now in terms of that impact. Going on to accessibility and sustainable location, there are some facilities in the village. They are limited. We fully recognise that, and sustainability does weigh against the proposal. We are clear on that again in the report. The parish council did identify that the preschool is shutting down in February due to staffing issues, and although it's still advertised as sort of being open, that is correct. We have checked that out, and that is the case that the preschool is shutting down. So members will need to note that when they consider the sustainability. Convenient walking distance, and Children's Services have advised that this is oversubscribed. And therefore children may have to travel further afield to other primary schools. So just to reiterate, the sustainability location does weigh against the proposal, and members need to factor that into the planning balance. In terms of flooding, the site is in flood zone 1, where residential development is compatible. Residential development is even compatible in flood zone 2, so that's, I think, worth noting. There are small areas with surface water flooding, which is mainly in the woodland area, and in my experience in dealing with these type of sites, this is generally what would be expected from an agricultural field of this size. There is a sustainable urban drainage system proposed. Again, the council's training engineer is not objecting. He's advised as well that the discharge volume would be below equivalent greenfield volumes in terms of the size that's been proposed. So going on to sort of wrapping up the planning balance. So in terms of harm, this does include a conflict with spatial strategy, which we fully recognise that, which I've also advised well, because of our housing land supply position, it must be noted that the sort of CP17 and CP9 policies we rely on setting out sort of scale of development are out of date by reason of the housing land supply shortfall. It doesn't mean they have no weight, but it is still something to take into consideration. There would be a landscape impact. We fully recognise that. And the location is unsustainable to some degree as well. In terms of the benefits, there would be, in terms of 80 dwellings, this would be a meaningful contribution to housing in the borough, where we do have a housing land supply shortfall. There'd be 40% affordable housing, and generally we've seen inspectors give this significant weight in the planning balance. The NPPF clearly sets out a government objective for wanting to significantly boost the supply of homes as well. So in terms of the housing being delivered, that is a weighty benefit that does need to be weighed in the planning balance. There would be economic benefits, generally sustaining local businesses and sort of expenditure of people. There would be a biodiversity net gain on site, and the woodlands and the public play areas would be publicly available open space. The design of itself of the scheme is considered good in terms of the insular design. So overall, in considering everything in the planning balance, it is considered the adverse impacts are not do not demonstrably and significantly outweigh the benefits as paragraph 11. As I said, that's an on-balance decision, and we've looked at all the factors, and therefore, Chairman, it is recommended for approval subject to conditions and the legal agreement set out. Thank you.
Mark, thank you for that. And I think on behalf of the committee, thank you for presenting what has been a well-balanced report. These are things that are never easy to write and never easy to be easily comprehensible to those who are not in the world of planning. But you have explained, I think, quite clearly the pros of the site, but also brought to light the concerns that the council shares with other residents about how the issues surrounding developing here. So we now have, my apologies for my earlier premature announcement. We now have Ian Fullerton from Swallowfield Parish Council, who's in the room and is speaking in objection to the application. Ian, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here representing the views of Swallowfield Parish Council. and the vast majority of local residents who, through their written objections and presence here this evening, vigorously oppose this application. By his own admission, the planning officer has sacrificed a host of relevant and well-considered planning policies in exchange for a tiny contribution to the council's 5-year land supply. He concluded that the adverse impacts of the development didn't outweigh its benefits. We submit that this is incorrect, that the balance of benefits is simply wrong, and hence the application should be rejected. Contrary to assertions by the applicant, the site is unsustainable and incongruous in a local context. The complete lack of essential infrastructure fundamentally undermines this proposal. Consider the lack of schools within reasonable walking or cycling distance of Swallowfield. There is, from February, no preschool, no primary school, no secondary school closer than a car journey away. With no suitable bus service, every child will require transport by car to and from schools a significant distance away and potentially at WBC's expense. There are virtually no existing or potential employment opportunities in the village or nearby. Swallowfield medical practice has recently expanded to its physical limits and is already at breaking point. There is no supermarket, no leisure centre, no entertainment facilities anywhere nearby. Travel to these or to work will require further car journeys. It makes no sense to site much needed affordable homes in a location so lacking in facilities. With 81 homes, 101 if you include the adjacent Cove Home site, and a realistic average of 2 cars per property, the office's approximation of only 41 to 47 in-out movements during peak hours seems vastly underestimated. We anticipated more like 300 to 400 movements per day. All of these journeys will use Trowers Lane, then travel east through a congested conservation area in the street or west of the B3349. Both roads are narrow, less than 5.5 meters in places and incapable of being widened. If approved, this application would, at a stroke, result in a 42% increase in the size of Swallowfield Village, changing its historic rural character and initiating an irreversible urbanization of the parish. We all want appropriate, sustainable ecological solutions, with SDLs and their infrastructure being an integral part of our way forward, and development which will benefit future residents. We want to save our rural villages and conservation areas. We want to tackle climate change and support WBC's policy of reducing the need for cars.
Yeah, I'm going to have to ask you to summarise quite quickly, please.
If you have the slightest doubt about this proposal, please respect CP9 and CP11 and vote against it. Thank you.
Ian. Thank you for your conciseness and keeping to time. We now have 2 residents, one who is here and one who is, I think, online, both speaking in objection. Is that not correct? No, the second one withdrew. So we just have Mr. Jeremy Bayliss. Okay, so Mr. Bayliss, please come forward. You have, again, 3 minutes.
If I finish you up, it was on.
It was on.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I am actually a retired planning consultant. In practice, I gave evidence of several hundred planning inquiries, etc., etc. So I do have a wealth of planning experience. I was asked by various residents to speak on their behalf, and so I do speak now on behalf of the residents who are passionate about this proposal, as evidenced by all of the letters that you have received and the number of people in this room and next door. Your council has a very good record of listening to residents. A few years ago, as a result of consultation, your council actually negotiated with central government a reduction in what they had said should be the housing allocation. And so I hope that your council, you, Mr. Chairman, and the members of this committee will again listen to what the residents are saying. Swallowfield is special. It is a unique in this part of the borough. The other villages have all been developed out of being villages, such as Shinfield, etc. I remember when it was a village. So it is unique, and the residents of Swallowfield believe that further major development would not just be inappropriate, but would irreversibly damage the village, its character and environment, to the extent that the adverse impacts of the development clearly outweigh the benefits, if any. And I hasten to add, the benefits that have been given by Mr. Croucher are mostly benefits which would apply to any residential development and are not peculiar to this particular site. The proposal is contrary to the planning policies for Swallowfield, which seek to restrict development to within the boundaries of the settlement. Those policies recognise the importance and value of Swallowfield as a village, and with planning decisions based upon them, they have stood the test of time, and that has been to the benefit of the whole community. Local residents have engaged with your council, as evidenced by all of the letters that you have received, whereas the applicants in this case have not engaged with local residents in any meaningful way. The proposal will result in a massive increase, some 42% in the size of the village. This would be wholly inappropriate, and with its attendant activities severely damage the ambience and character of the village. It would do nothing to conserve and enhance it in accordance with policy, and that policy is in the NPPF. An appeal was dismissed, that is, permission was refused in March 2023, March of last year, for 200 houses on land east of Lodge Road, Hurst, a village with the same planning status and similar circumstances. The policy was similar to that of today, including that relating to cases where there was not a deliverable 5-year supply of house building land. So that demonstrates the important things which Mr. Croucher referred to in paragraph 11D. I and the residents support the Swallowfield Parish Council in their opposition to and all that they have said regarding this proposal. I suggest that it must be obvious that for the planning balance, the extent of harm far outweighs any benefits.
Mr. Baileyson, we have to ask you to summarise now, please. You have run over time.
All that I was going to say is, for all of these reasons, which are wholly consistent with central government policy, I ask that this application be refused.
Thank you, Deputy, for your presentation. Thank you, Mr. Bailey, for your presentation. Our final speaker on this item is Mr. Chris Roberts, who is here and is the agent speaking on behalf of the applicant.
From Boyer Plan and working on behalf of the applicant Crowdace Homes, I'd like to raise 3 points for you to consider this evening. So firstly, the site sustainability, the proposed allocation of the site, and the main benefits of the scheme as we see them. So firstly, in terms of sustainability, and as the officer's report has noted, the site lies immediately adjacent to the settlement boundary of the village. It is suitable for the number of homes that are envisaged. That's what the report says. So as a village, Swallowfield, relative to its size, is relatively well served by the services that are there. There are lots of villages that are smaller or of the same size that don't have the facilities that it does. So this includes the post office, it includes a convenience store, it includes a public house, it includes the parish hall, and there are local employment opportunities at the city base and Wildwoods Farm Court sites. So there are some employment opportunities that you can get to locally. I think importantly, there is also an hourly bus service to and from Reading. Again, lots of villages wouldn't benefit from that accessibility to a major centre such as that. And secondly, and I think really very importantly, this is not an application that's come from nowhere, as pointed out by the officer. It's the council's local plan update revised growth strategy that did identify this as the only potential proposed allocation in Swallowfield. So for residential development, that is. The site, it doesn't flood, it's not ecologically constrained. The highways officers have endorsed the car parking strategy and the access arrangement to the site, and those were the main considerations set out within the emerging local plan to consider. So this site is therefore capable of meeting a share of the borough's housing need, and the council is not proposing to concentrate all future development within the SDLs or all at Wokingham. It is dispersing growth to other areas. And so thirdly, if you'll allow me, I'd like to just draw your attention to what I see as the main benefits of the scheme. So that is 33 affordable homes. Now, you've had a scheme before you this evening on a brownfield site that wasn't capable for viability reasons to provide affordable homes. What you get with greenfield sites is that they are capable of providing affordable homes. So in this case, that's going to be first homes, it'd be shared ownership properties, socially rented properties. And I think that's significant in a village that it isn't furnished with a great stock of existing social housing, affordable housing within the village. And I do think it's relevant that there are, according to the council's evidence, 2,419 people on its housing waiting list. So affordable housing is an important benefit. All of these new homes will be net zero carbon ready. They'll be future proof with low carbon heating systems, be extremely thermally efficient and have photovoltaic panels on the roofs. We're going beyond to local plan policies in terms of that. The site, as members will have seen, is very well enclosed by existing trees, and we're proposing to plant 132 new trees on site. Our net biodiversity gain figure is circa 20%, and that can be secured by condition that's obviously well above the 10% required in legislation. We're providing lots of other ecological enhancements, including wildlife ponds, swales, wildflower planting, back boxes, swift bricks, invertebrate habitats, hedgehog-friendly planting. And in addition to that, we're providing new play areas, one large play area, one small lap within the site. And that's part of 2.8 hectares of public open space. That's well above the 1 hectare of public open space that we're required to provide on this site. We're proposing improvements to footpaths on Trowes Lane, Foxborough and the street, as well as to local bus stops. And overall, the community infrastructure levy contribution will amount to some 2.8 million as payments towards improvements to local infrastructure. So we submit this is a good quality development. It's been designed with a lot of input from council officers and their welcome advice. We think there's a strong case for approval in line with the officer recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, I am going to ask you please to treat the discussion with the respect it deserves. It's not easy to come here when we've got a very large crowd who clearly have a very passionate and understandable interest, but everyone here is trying to do a professional job in your interests, I may add. So please bear with us and bear that in mind. Thank you. I should recall before any further discussion the people who made the site visit, which was everybody on the committee other than Councillor Soane. Wayne didn't make it either, and Rochelle didn't.
Didn't make the site visit on the Friday. I did visit the site on Tuesday, just to give myself a better understanding. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yep, sorry, Chair. And as it was just looking at a field, I went yesterday as well.
Okay, so I'm going to take, if the committee members excuse me, I'm going to take a very unusual step of opening the discussion myself. This is because we have a very large number of people here, and I'm going to try and help them as best I can understand what we're discussing and why. Because this is a full application, not just an outline application, which means what we see is what we get. It's not where some applications come in just to establish a point of principle of development and then further details are worked out later. So from what we've heard so far, we can see that on the one hand, this application clearly goes against the intent of a considerable number of local and indeed some national planning policies. And I think that concerns many of us. On the other hand, few concerns thus far have been raised about the design and style of the development. And in particular, we might welcome the generous provision of affordable housing. So it seems to me, although I stand to be corrected by the committee as discussion unfolds, that we have generally few concerns about the details of the development and that we are far more focused on the question of whether this is a suitable location for it. If location is the prime concern of the committee, then we do have to also consider that in the most recent published draft local plan update from November 2021, this site was identified as one that would be supported by the Council for Housing. And if it was in one draft of the local plan update, it is a fact that it cannot easily be excluded from a future draft without very good planning reasons which indicate a change of circumstance. And I will welcome Wayne's contribution on that, as he's more experienced with these things than I do. So if the committee were to decide to refuse this application, we need to do so for reasons of planning policy, which our officers can defend and appeal. There is no point in making a gesture here to see it knocked back further down the road. Also, if it can be defended at appeal, we also need to make sure that we can justify this site being removed from any future draft of the local plan, or we're all going to end up being back here again. If we can't identify these robust reasons, then we should approve the application and not mislead people into thinking that development of this site can be prevented. So I make those points simply to help us focus our discussions on if you feel as a committee that we should be refusing this application, we have very solid grounds for doing so. First up was Andrew, who's got control of the pen. Then I have Rochelle. Further speakers of that, Wayne? And I'll move around then.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, I'd like to suggest that we try to manage the discussion, our questions and officers' responses thematically. So I would like to begin this discussion by addressing some of the matters that have been raised with regards to the provision of services. And I'll take as a specific example the provision or access to educational facilities. Now, for the benefit of those who have not been furnished with copies of the supplementary agenda, although these will, of course, be online, I would like to draw people's attention, everybody's attention, to the fact that officers have provided us tonight with an additional 2 pages of information regarding provision of educational facilities in this vicinity. Now, I'd like to ask a couple of questions, quite short, very specific questions relating to school provision. And the first question is very specifically, are there situations in which there have been decisions to refuse an application on the basis of lack of facilities, in this case, access to education, where the decision to refuse has been upheld for reasons of access to school facilities?
Thank you. Do you mean upheld at appeal?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, I think if I understand your question, so your question is, has there been a scenario where officers have recommended refusal and inspectors have gone with that? Is that correct? Yeah, there are. I think the speaker mentioned one in Lodge Road in Hurst, which we refused on accessibility grounds. And incidentally, I was the case officer for that and was involved in the appeal. So that was refused on sustainability grounds. Funnily enough, we had another application, albeit only 3 houses in Hurst, which was refused, I think, just before Christmas and upheld at appeal for the poor sustainability. And again, I was involved in that because it was one of my team who refused that. And again, I think thinking of the big inquiries I've done, there was one at 9 Mile Ride, north of 9 Mile Ride, where we won an appeal based on accessibility to local services, and one east of Finch Hampstead Road, which was a Gladman application. Again, we won on that. We don't always get home on that point, to be honest. There is another one in Hurst, which is a small triangle site for 3 units where the inspector approved it. There was one I dealt with quite recently, which was one called Kingfisher Grove, and that was in 3 Mile Cross for, I think it was around 50 affordable units. Actually, the inspector agreed with us fully on it was an unsustainable site, but he still went on to approve it. So it's not necessarily an insurmountable issue. It does need to be weighed in the planning balance. So there are decisions that go either way, but generally we have a good track record of inspectors agreeing with us on sustainability grounds. But it's just how that sits in the planning balance.
Just for clarity, access to educational facilities is a part of that calculus in at least some of those examples. Thank you very much. Now, also related to that, going back to the 2-page document that officers have very helpfully provided that sets out, amongst other things, a list of all of the schools, primary and secondary, that are accessible or that that might be considered as accessible should this development go ahead. My question, though, is again very, very specific. We know that I think it's all bar one of the secondary schools, and certainly all of the secondary schools that are listed in this document, all bar one of the secondary schools in our borough, and certainly all of the secondary schools mentioned here are academies, that borough-wide about 50% of our primary schools are academies. And we know that academies have the authority to determine their own admissions criteria. I think it might have been Swallowfield Parish Council raised the matter of catchment areas, and that is within the purview of academies. So my question is, the ability for academies to determine catchment areas must, as a layperson, I would assume, impact on the actual options that are available when it comes to parents, for their children. Is that a fair understanding?
I can't say I have any experience in that field. What I would say is that in the supplementary update, the schools listed have come from Children's Services, and those are schools that they consider would be in a catchment of the site. So that's the way I've understood that they've listed those. And I think just to make a differentiation, there is a difference between being in the school catchment and being accessible in sustainability terms, just to sort of make that clear distinction.
If I may ask just one final question on this point. The officer's report does make it very clear that should this development go ahead, it's almost certain that many children would need to be accommodated with the borough's Home for School Transport policy, under the borough's Home for School Transport policy. And the supplementary agenda makes the point that while some Section 106 funding could be allocated to cover what are quite substantial costs, particularly when considered that these would be likely, to be borne almost in perpetuity. The officer's report does make it very clear in the supplementary agenda that any Section 106 money available for that purpose, that specific purpose, would be unlikely to cover this in the long term. My question is this a material planning consideration? It certainly has implications for the borough, but is it a material planning consideration?
Yes, it is, and I'll update that position slightly in a moment. What I would probably suggest is that it needs to circle back round to sustainability in terms of considering that. We have been discussing actually with colleagues in Children's Services and infrastructure funding in quite some detail actually to try and sort of bottom out this issue. Essentially, what we've been advised is that the local government settlement, which is administered by the Department for Levelling Up and Housing and Communities, and funding from CIL and funding from council tax should cover that cost. However, obviously we don't know the makeup of the site and who's going to live there and who's not. So they have advised us that there is a concern that with Section 106 that there would be double counting, and therefore they wouldn't be able to do it because there are these free funding streams where it's expected to cover those costs. For example, CIL, the whole point of CIL was to cover infrastructure, which arises as a result of the development. So we have been advised that there is a double counting issue with Section 106, and that the sort of free income streams I've mentioned should cover the sort of overheads of delivering such development. The other sort of pertinent issue is in the appeal to the North, which was approved in 2018. The inspector for there did actually note this point, and I think in paragraph 45 of that, he referred it to CIL, as I just said. He said, "I understand that the scheme would be liable to pay for a community infrastructure levy, which has been formulated to fund the needs arising in relation, among other things, to health centres, GP surgeries and education." And he just leaves the point there. So essentially, I think I hear what you're saying, and I think the point is it needs to circle back around to accessibility, and then obviously you know, in terms of the members' planning judgment, in terms of your concerns and that, and how that weighs in the planning balance.
Thank you. I've next got Rochelle and then Wayne.
Yeah, all of the planning committee members know what the 5-year land supply means. And the fact that we're down to 3.9% at this point, 3.9 years. And I wonder if you could explain to the residents, since there are a lot of residents here, and I'm sure they don't have a clue what the 5-year land supply means, what would happen if it goes down significantly below the 3.9 years, and what could happen to us if this occurs?
I'm not sure if I would go there because it's sort of speculative in terms that I think we just have to consider it on its merits of where we are now. You're correct, at 3.95 years. I think it's fair to say, though, in terms of our discussion with colleagues, and I think they've been very open at appeals about this, is that we are likely to have a housing land supply, or the council is, until we get a local plan update on board, which is at least 2 years out. So I would say that it's not going to be a surplus for the next few years. However, in terms of where the supply position is at a certain point in time when you assess an application, I wouldn't like to speculate because it's very complex, and it would need to be sort of considered at that time and what are the factors around that as well. Case law is quite clear as well that when you have a housing land supply shortfall, you also need to look at all the relevant factors involved. You don't just sort of go 3.95 years, okay, let's move on. So I wouldn't like to speculate, if I'm perfectly honest.
One of the things that could occur would be somebody could take over and either decide where we can build houses, or there's a possibility that we could have lose the ability to decide anything at all. They could put houses, they could put 500 houses in Swallowfield if they wanted to, depending on that. If they had a good inspector who said, oh, yes, I think the 5-year land supply is not here. And it has happened in other places in the country where they have taken over the planning department, or they've approved other applications that were possibly could be turned down normally. Could that not occur?
I think we're some way out from that scenario, if I'm perfectly possible. It's not a scenario I recognise it either, if I'm honest. As I said, that the housing land supply position is as it is. Yeah, and I've probably got nothing further to add on that point for now. Yeah,
but it could occur.
Yeah, I'm going to go across to Wayne.
I'm going to correct you on some of that because it's important this audience knows. Our land supply position on the 1st of April 2022 was 3.94 years. That was calculated in December 22, as Mark mentioned, for the Hurst appeal. So we're now nearly 2 years out. This borough has over-delivered from the plan, and the plan runs to 2026. So it's not out of date, but because we've dropped below the 5-year land supply, then other factors apply, as Mark's referred to, the point on page 2 of his report. But we've always over-delivered. This borough is not in the bad category. It's always been in the good category. And as you know, that was recognised with the over-delivery that we've had over the last 4 or 5 years. So in 1 year, we were nearly double what we should have delivered. And that's what we were hoping for in the NPPF update that came out 2 weeks ago by Michael Gove. But I don't think we've got to where we wanted to get to. But also I would like to make a point as a point of history here. The LPU that we consulted on, we never finalised. It was a consultation. And the idea of consultations is you go out and you get feedback. We've never fed back to anybody. So that's been sat on the shelf for nearly 20 months with nothing fed back to our residents. So I think we need to remember that. And our chair is very right. I don't know what's in the latest thinking of the administration, but I'm aware that sites have been taken out. So to say if we sit here tonight and if we take this out, if we do that, you know, I mean, I think we need to just consider this site. And having spent 2 weeks at the appeal, Mark was there, but we had a consultant as the primary, and you were there as well. And we spent 2 weeks, and the whole thing was framed around sustainability. Now, where do I start? You've made a good start, Andrew, a very good start, education. So we're bringing children into this area, and just look at what's on the supplementary agenda. You're going to ship them out because there's no school locally. But it does say that the Oakbank School may be in walking distance of the new homes. I think realistically, I mean, I don't know the area, but Stuart knows the area, and he says it's about 50 minutes and there's no pavements. So are these residents or the future residents going to allow their children to do that? I don't know. They've got a convenience shop. They've got a pub. What else? Where are they going to go to the shops? So I'm at the moment thinking, when you come to, and you know, I'm going to defend Mark, but when it comes to this planning balance, I think the massive question for this committee tonight is, when you weigh everything up, Mark has made a decision that's been supported by his bosses that on the planning balance is in favour of development. We've got to, I know it's a simple question, we've got to work out, as David has said, we've got to work out, is that right? Is that the right decision, or do we make a different decision? So far, I've not heard anything that encourages me or convinces me that this development is sustainable. I would like to just pick up on the point about cars, Gordon, if I can. I went to the site yesterday, and I understand you want to increase the size of the access lane, but this borough's, the last analysis I have seen is that the number of cars per household is 2.4. And you're nodding because we've had this on many occasions. Thank you, Rachel. So I work it out that that's 194 cars. So you could say, well, people are going to work from home. It looks like they're all going to have to take their kids to school or get on the transport that Andrew's referred to. But that is a lot of cars coming off that junction. I'll let you respond to that in a moment. The development limit, I wouldn't mind, Mark, if you could just indulge me back to your map, please, and just could you put your cursor where this site is? I know you picked out the 2 points at the top of the map, but could you just explain to me? Yeah, you know, you give me the settlement boundary of the village.
Certainly.
Yeah, that's it.
Not sure.
Could you just put your cursor on where it
It's
is?
like working at the moment. Oh, there you go. Sorry, Wayne, did you say where the site is?
Yeah, where the site is, please.
So, sorry, it's a bit laggy, but I'll leave it there. But it's the sort of corner there.
Right.
If you see Charles Lane.
Yep.
And then so it'd be the northern boundary would abut some of the settlement boundary, which is the property Linweilg, and then the rest of the northern boundary would abut that sort of notch in the settlement boundary.
Yeah.
I shall try and get up, which
So
is
the
where
dark-
the appeal decision.
The darker green is the woodland, is that right?
Dark green would be considered countryside. Oh, green is countryside, but yeah, the darker green is sort of woodland areas. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And I think it was Mr. Bayliss, well, also Mr. Fullerton mentioned the increase, 42% increase against the base of the village. So, you know, I'm going to leave it there for now. But I mean, I'm just in this camp of I can't see this being sustainable, and I don't want to stretch it any further than using those words, because as you know, at Hurst, we hung on the word sustainable.
Sorry, Chairman, can I?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Wayne. Just to jump in on a point there, just of kind of order and for the benefit of obviously members of the public who are here tonight. just to be clear, no decision has been made on the application as such. Obviously, an officer recommendation has been presented to the members of the committee, and obviously it is for the committee to consider all aspects that are included in the agenda, the supplementary and the debate presented to them, and the committee is at liberty to come to a different judgment. The recommendation is a professional officer recommendation, and that is the officer's judgment. So it's just a point of clarification for those that are in attendance. Thank you.
Sorry, Chairman, I just had some quick points. In terms of Oak Bank School, and you mentioned the supplementary agenda, I agree with you. I think the children's services person writing that was just responding to an email, so that's why they put it. But I agree, it's not within walking distance in sustainability and accessibility terms. In terms of you mentioned about the site being unsustainable. I said it's not the officer's position that the site is highly sustainable and therefore it should be approved. It's more the case that it's unsustainable. That weighs in the planning balance. But we feel the planning balance takes us another direction than perhaps some people consider. In terms of the increase in the size vision, it was mentioned in one of the representations you've heard. I've calculated to be 20% when you take into land area, not the 40% put forward. So I would say when you look at the size of the residential part of the site, that would be a 20% increase in my calculations. I haven't done that calculation. I just done it by area. That might explain if there's a difference then.
Mark, thank you. I've got Andrew. Is anybody else wanting to speak on this? So I'll then have Bill, Al, that'll be going on with.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to introduce an additional line of inquiry now, and that is relationship to or the matter of policy CP11 and the location of the proposed site or of the site in the countryside. It's not uncommon for this committee to consider applications for development in the countryside, but my recollection is that in almost all, if not all cases, we are always presented with a list of exceptions, that would enable or permit development in the countryside. And I apologise if I'm incorrect, but I don't recall seeing such a list of exceptions in this very good report. It's a very balanced report, but I was puzzled that I didn't see this there. How, if I'm correct, and that the list of exceptions is not presented, can I ask how would this proposal actually measure up in terms of those exceptions?
Thank you. Yeah, at the end of paragraph 12, I do say that development would not fall within any of the exceptions in policy CP11. In terms of the exceptions, I mean, I can go through them, but essentially any new dwelling in the countryside would conflict with that, with the exceptions set out. Generally, I don't know, would it be helpful to go through them now? I think there's 7. So.
No, I mean, unless I get said otherwise by one of the committee members, I think I can accept that CP11 is there to deal with random development stretched out in the countryside, and that any significant development attached to a existing settlement will always breach CP11.
That's it.
I'm prepared to accept that, and with other committee members want to debate it further.
If I could just pursue that a little bit more, and I do apologise, I have actually highlighted in the report, paragraph 11, I'd overlooked that. But my question then pertains to the scale, of what is being proposed here, and is that relevant? If we're talking about, we are talking about, potentially 81 homes. Is that a factor, in the evaluation of this matter of building in the countryside?
It is, yes, and I'd say I think there's probably 3 areas where it is relevant. I think one is in terms of assessing it against the policies in the core strategy, which sets out the scale of development, which would generally be expected of a limited development location, notwithstanding that, as I've said, that policy is out of date by virtue of not having a 5-year housing land supply. Again, I think it comes into play when you look at character and appearance. and impacts on the landscape. Obviously, if you have a development of one house, it's going to be less than if you have a development of 81 houses. So it is a relevant thing to take into account. It also sort of weaves its way into sustainability as well. Generally, we've found inspectors far more relaxed about the odd home or the smaller developments in terms of accessibility than larger schemes. So I think it comes into play in several places in the assessment. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bill?
Yes, thank you. I've sat many times on home to school transport appeals, and I can honestly say that I don't think I've ever met a parent who would rather not be there and not have to ask for assistance to get their child to school. And I think we've obviously discussed the cost involved to the council, but I think also we've got to consider the impact on the child, the amount of time spent travelling, unnecessary time. And when you're talking about a development like this, we're making it impossible for them not to have to spend that time travelling to and from school. So it's not a question, it's an observation. I just think there's so many considerations we should take, apart from the ongoing cost of this council, also to the impact on children itself.
Bill, thank you. Got Al?
Well, just to follow up on Bill's point, I mean, the Farley Hill School has been moved 2 miles further away. I mean, it was the school, and it's now 2 miles further away. It's over 4 miles away. So it's which makes it even less sustainable. But I just wanted to point out on the proposal at the front, it says full planning application, 81 dwellings, pedestrian and cycle links, and then we get to paragraph 87 where it says, there are no cycle lanes in the vicinity. Basingstoke Road is a busy B road and what not be an attractive route to all cyclists. Cycling infrastructure in the area is limited and the development would unlikely encourage an uptake in modal journeys by bicycles. So I'm not quite sure why in the proposal he mentions cycle links.
I think that's in terms of the footpaths that come out of the site, particularly to the southern boundary, they will be shared footpaths. I imagine like hogging material or something to that effect. So there's a differentiation between what would be delivered on site and what is the cycle network outside of the site. So I think they're two different things. I think the description is correct, but also what you say is correct about the surrounding settlement and what we've noted in the report. I think in terms of sort of going back to sustainability, I think there is sort of one bit of the NPPF I think that does need to be borne in mind, and that's paragraph 83. And that does say to promote sustainable development in rural areas, housing should be located where it enhance or maintain the vitality of rural communities. Planning policy should identify opportunities for villages to grow and thrive, especially where it will support local services. And it says where there are a group of smaller settlements, development in one village may support another service in a village nearby. That's actually kind of very relevant to sort of 3 Mile Cross and the Shinfield area and how those Spencer's Wood and how they've been developed. As in, you may have a secondary school in one part, but they've generally sort of utilise each other's facilities, and that's generally how this part of the borough has been developed. So I do think, absolutely, I've heard everything the members have said and fully respect that, but I do think that needs to be borne into their thinking of how it sort of sits in the planning balance. Because that will be used against us if it went to appeal, or if it's refused. And again, I think is rather than being used against us, I think it also relates positively to the development that part of the NPPF.
And I could just make a couple of other thanks. Make just a couple of other observations, really. I mean, the bus service, I mean, hangs by a thread, doesn't it? I mean, it comes and goes. I mean, it's hardly a sustainable service. I mean, it's relying on various grants and things to keep it running, but it has disappeared over the years. And so, I mean, the nearest food shops, large sort of supermarkets. I mean, it's like 5 miles. And Morrison's in Reading, isn't it? And I mean, it's 7 miles to Winnersh, to Sainsbury's at Winnersh. I mean, there's no, I mean, all these vehicles. These are going to. This is generating extra vehicle moves, and I mean, even in the current village, the developments that have happened already in the village have added the sort of suburban feature of a mini roundabout, which isn't really conducive with the look of the village. And so they've already had to concede concede some suburbanisation in the village. I mean, there seems to be a large discrepancy between the parish council's traffic analysis and the borough council's traffic analysis in terms of vehicle movements. I mean, is there any reason for that?
Mr. Chairman, the assessment was carried out using the nationally accepted means of assessing a transport assessment, looking at peak hours movements. And in this case, it's the AM and the PM peak movements. The trip rates were the ones that were used for the approved borough trip rates, which were assessed using the TRICS, which is the national database of sites that have been surveyed. And that's when we came out with the rates that are in our committee report. We do not look at the daily traffic, because that varies, because it could be people coming back in, going out, the same cars doing umpteen journeys. But in nationally accepted terms, we look at the impact of traffic on the busiest peak hour, wherever that might be. It doesn't have to be 8 to 9, it could be 7 to 8, 7:30 to 8:30. But that's how it's nationally accepted. That's how we carry out an assessment of TAs, transport assessments.
Just going back to the supermarket point, obviously that was a factor of development to the north that would have been taken into account. Also, in terms of sort of SDLs around that area and the Grafton, Spencerswood and 3 Mile Cross, that they've obviously been allocated as acceptable, even though there's you do have to go further afield for supermarket provision. And I mentioned before the Kingfisher Grove appeal, where the inspector said it is unsustainable, but still found it acceptable in the planning bands. There was also an appeal in between Spencerswood and 3 Mile Cross. I don't know what it's commonly referred to, but it's where Prior Gardens is and Star Rise is. And again, that was allowed by the inspector, you know, and he would have taken into account the sustainability of the location there. I do appreciate this is further afield, but in terms of the Aberfield Garrison development as well, there is a new supermarket going in the town centre, which I'm not sure how far that's progressed, but it has been in discussion for quite some time and sort of various updates of that being delivered. So that is being progressed.
I will go around the table again for any further contributions, but I'll make a couple myself, if I may, as I sat back and listened. This is, to me, in many ways quite finely balanced. And I say that because we have to take the approach, like it or not, that we may be people looking at this completely fresh and from afar, and not perhaps carried up in the obvious emotion of the discussions and the strength of feeling. My focus, I have to say, is not on this meeting, because I doubt this is going to be the last we hear of this. Whichever way you look at it, it could well get appealed. There is the issue of where it sits in the local plan. And therefore, what decision we get to here, I'm certain will be further discussed beyond our control. But we need, if there is a mind to refuse the application, to give the officers the very best guidance that we can on what we feel about it and why that should be. If I can just expand upon that point for the benefit of the large numbers of people here, you may have the view that us approving the application tonight is the worst possible outcome. It isn't. The worst possible outcome is that we reject the application and it gets overturned at appeal, because at that point we lose all control of it. Now, we may maintain some of the conditions that are attached to it, but we can't guarantee it. So in your own interest, we do have to take that into account and to consider very carefully where we go with this. I think there's some things that we've decided. The addition of size of the village is, I think, hurtful to the village, but I've seen worse. And if you stood in it from afar, you'd say it doesn't close the gap between Swallowfield and another nearby settlement. It doesn't coalesce settlements. That's something that I watch out for very carefully. There's been a lot of comments about traffic. I think all the councillors on the committee would take the view that we always discuss traffic and we always lose the debate. This is a technical argument, and the thresholds set by planning policy are far higher than we might want to accept as individual councillors, and that's just the way it is. So those are arguments we're not going to win. the sustainability one is another debate entirely, and I will reserve comment on that and come back to it. There is this issue of where it sits in the local plan. As Wayne mentioned, I know of one site that has disappeared, and that's because the landowner accepted it be taken out, and the landowner in that case was Woking Borough Council. Where you've got a private landowner, it's a different order of magnitude to challenge what's in a draft proposal, even a draft proposal in the local plan, and we really can't ignore that. Had we taken the steps advised by some to go ahead with the local plan update as was and retrieve the 5-year land supply, this site would have been in it. So we need to be careful how we make those arguments. So one thing we haven't touched on, which is a concern to me, is comments about the loss of high quality agricultural land. We've had many sites that have been brownfields, some that have been category 3 or low grade agricultural land. This is the first I've seen where we've got highest quality agricultural land designations. Where does that sit in the balance, please, Mark?
It does weigh against it, but I do think you need to as well consider the points, which I've sort of summarised, but it's been the points put forward by the applicant and the sort of landowner in terms of, I think it's paragraph 28. So they sort of, you know, say that it's only sort of developed average crop yields. It's not very well suited to their modern farming operation because it's slightly isolated from the rest of the estate. And it would be inconsequential to their operation, or it wouldn't harm their operation rather. So it does weigh against it in sort of a purely policy terms. But I think you need to take those factors into account. I imagine sort of walking it forward, what would happen is, you know, they would sort of say, well, you know, the person farming the land probably knows best what's happening there and what crop yields they get. But nevertheless, I do think the policy conflict does need to be taken into account.
Would I be right in saying the person farming the land is the person who's selling it?
That is a very good point. And now I imagine a planning barrister would put exactly that point to them. However, you know, unless you've got arguments against it ourselves, and that, you know, well, actually it's been, you know, producing fantastic yields, which we just haven't have. So we've got no evidence to refute what they're saying.
Okay, Mark, thank you. I will come back. Any other comments around the table? I mean, if I just come back to my own particular feelings on this, not to repeat things I've already said, to me, the one very substantive issue that sits there is the question that we've all touched on of sustainability. I mean, there's just no question that this is a sustainable site. Everybody living there, working elsewhere, is going to have a car. There are no realistic public transport options that I can see operating from it. And particularly the school situation concerns me hugely. And that is the one thing that is, I think, tipping my view on this. If it hadn't been for that, I'd have found it quite difficult to oppose. But the school situation is barely credible, frankly. The senior schools, particularly at Bowhunt, as being mentioned as alternative, is several miles away and is already reducing its own catchment area where I live in Finchampstead because of the popularity of it. The primary school situation is even worse. The thought of driving primary school children to Farley Hill in Barkham, where it now is, I mean, I shudder to think. So that for me, when we look at some of the planning inquiries, the planning objections we put in before that have been upheld on sustainability grounds, this seems to be at least as strong as any of those. We can't also, as members of the council, ignore the impact of the potential cost of home to school transport. That is proving, I don't wish to exaggerate, it's proving ruinous to the council at the moment. It is threatening very many of the core services we provide. And while we may say that in very strict planning terms, there's some doubt how material that is, an application that threatens the functioning of the council, which it does in terms of revenue, can't be discounted. We do have to bear that in mind. I think we would be neglecting our responsibilities as elected members if we didn't bear that as part of our decision making. Whether a planning inspector agrees with us, I don't know. I'm not in favour at all of, however we may wish to sort of acknowledge the concerns of residents and particularly those present. I do not think it's a good idea to line ourselves up for heroic defeats. It's the easiest thing in the world for us to make ourselves popular and to walk out the room to your cheers and applause by doing what you want to do. But we do have to look what happens down the line in the future. So if we are to, as I said before, if we are to reject this, we need to make sure we give the officers more than a fighting chance of sustaining that objection at an appeal. And that's the bit I want to focus on in the last few minutes, whether anybody wants to add to that. And Wayne, you've again got considerable experience on this. And I'm going to come to Andrew.
Sorry. Can I just ask a quick question, Mark? Was this site in the LPU update in 21 regarded as suitable or unsuitable?
The 2021 version was the wording is potentially suitable. What I think there's some parish council comments on the 2020 HELA assessment, which had it as unsuitable, and I think the reason is fairly evident for that is that Graiseley was suddenly off the table, which would have delivered 10,000 houses in the borough. So then, as part of that process, we spoke to Ian Bellinger on this, that you go around again and you look at the sites. So therefore, obviously, that's quite a shortfall. So it went round to look again and then found out that, that in terms of assessing, what's the next best options, these was considered with this site was considered within that.
But it's interesting, isn't it, that you mentioned Kingfisher Grove, because it's inside the evacuation zone. And, if we'd have gone ahead with Graiseley, this is why I don't understand why it was ever approved, but it was. But so I'm sure we were going to see a lot of other traction coming in that direction. I mean, I agree, David. There is so much here. I mean, it's not just schools, it's shops, it's kind of everything. You imagine living there, you'll move into this area and you've got, I imagine you've got some very lovely pubs, and you've got a convenience store. That's it. That's what you've got, unless you get in your car. Schools included. So it then goes back to CP11, CP11, CP9, and on working through. But as you know, well, not as you know, but as Mark knows, in Hurst, the inspector was very, and I say very, favourable to the whole sustainability thing. And I don't see this any different to that, because when I look at the magnitude of that, Hurst has got 89 houses. That was for a development of 200. This site is 40%, so that would mean that there's about 300 houses in Swallowfield, and you're going to get another 81. So the magnitude, all right, the numbers are different, but the magnitude hasn't changed, and it comes back to this word, this lovely word, sustainability. And I honestly do think we could frame it around those policies that I've just mentioned.
If I can just add to that, when I'm looking at the recent appeals report on application 230201, which I'm sure you know about in Hurst, that appeal was dismissed, and the first comment there is the site would not be suitable for housing as future occupiers would have a high dependency on private motor vehicles to access services and facilities. The proposal will not promote sustainable transport modes. And I think that, to me, gives us, that helped tip my mind today in reading that. I think that gives us a form of words that I'd be quite prepared to hang our hats on.
And Mark will know, well, I won't say better than me, but Mark will know equally as well as me, the inspector's report for Lodge Road was, well, I could have written it myself with your knowledge.
Thank you. Just going back to Lodge Road, I agree with the points you've made about sustainability. I think in terms of the scales, I think it should be, I'm not saying this devalues what you're saying, but I think it should be borne in mind that Lodge Road was, I think, double the size of this appeal site. So it was a bigger scheme. And I think in my professional view as well, I think the landscape harm was worse in Lodge Road. And I think the access arrangements were particularly poor as well, because it was sort of away from the settlement. So I do think those are factors to be considered, and sort of some caution of sort of relying on that too much. Not saying you are, but I think there is some caution. I think as well with the scheme that you just mentioned, Chairman, actually that was the one I was referring to in terms of I was involved in. What I would say is that with sort of a couple of houses though, what we do see time and time again is that for larger schemes, for better or worse, the housing land supply and the affordable housing with them is given a lot more weight than just 3 houses. Quite often you'll find an inspector just say, well, it's only 3 houses in sort of more official wording. Obviously, it doesn't have a meaningful contribution. Whereas in our officer's opinion, 80 dwellings with 40% affordable housing, I think it's 33 affordable units, is a very meaningful contribution and does need to be significantly weighed in the balance.
And I don't doubt it will be weighed in the balance by an inspector. And I think this is the question we're all sitting on, that we need to do the right thing for the council as well as for the residents and not set ourselves up to fail. I've got Andrew. Anybody else wish to speak? Brian, do you want to let Brian speak first? Andrew, I'll come back to you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to jump in on the kind of discussion over sustainability, education in particular, I know councillors and speakers tonight have made a number of references to proximity of local schools. There's been reference made to admissions. There's been reference made to the home to school travel fund. There's been reference also to the catchment areas and the types of schools, whether they're academies or not, and their particular makeup and how they go through their admissions process. What I would urge members, obviously continuing this line of discussion and debate over sustainability, the examples that Mark referenced earlier in terms of those successful appeals were not focused or did not crystallise specifically around education, given that the double counting council tax that all new residents are liable to pay, the council's current funding arrangement for different services, and the fact that community infrastructure levy is applicable to this development and would, as the speaking agent has made clear, would be a sizable sum of money. The priorities of where that money is spent, how it is spent, is separate from this committee. And obviously sustainability, your post office, your pub, your school, health centre, is a wider basket of considerations. And again, I think that is where the issue that officers have rightfully recognised in the report and members rightfully recognise in discussion should be kept, just as a kind of word of caution. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, so any other speaker? Right, is Andrew?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, David. Once we've exhausted all the questions, I would actually like to make a proposal. But before we do that, I would like to ask for just one further point of clarification. I think it was Mr. Fullerton speaking on behalf of Swallowfield Parish Council who made reference to the planning policies of Swallowfield. And I'd just like some clarification as to whether or not there is a Swallowfield neighbourhood development plan, as we have in growing numbers of other places, or are there any local policies, that we should be cognizant of?
No, there's no neighbourhood plan. I did address that. I'm just trying to find where I've put it in the report. It was made an area to have a local plan, to have a neighbourhood plan, but that's as far as it's progressed. There is a village design statement, which is mentioned in the report as well.
Okay. Thank you for that. I would like to make a proposal. If that's okay.
Just check. Does anybody else want to say any further comment if we reach the end of the discussion? Okay. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to preface this proposal by echoing what has already been said, briefly echoing what has already been said about this, how this is a very finely balanced decision. I acknowledge that if this development was to proceed, that it would bring some quite considerable benefits, including in addition to the housing stock, including, importantly, our affordable housing stock. Some of the environmental credentials, have already of this full application have also been alluded to, and I treat them very, very seriously indeed. Notwithstanding, I would like to propose that we recommend that this application be refused, and I would like to initially suggest that we cite as reasons for refusal, firstly, around matters of sustainability. I take on board completely, Brian, and thank you very, very much, your sage warnings or advice, with regards to citing this as a reason for refusal, with regards, amongst other things, to education. However, I think that in this specific instance, there are very, very compelling reasons, to be very concerned, about the impact that this development would have on multiple fronts. I think it was Bill who alluded to some of the effects on the pupils themselves of having long daily commutes. That must not be underestimated. Pupils who have long commutes, those who have to rely upon home to school transport, are often excluded from some of the co-curricular or extracurricular activities of the school because they are reliant upon scheduled, timetabled homeschool transport. That is not an insignificant factor. I take on board, I believe also, that the sustainability issues when it comes to education are unquestionably linked into matters with regards to traffic and vehicle movement. And I, again, totally accept the highways team's calculus on these matters, but I believe that this is still has a very, very significant impact. I would like to ensure, that if we decide to cite sustainability or lack of sustainability as a reason for refusal, that the educational concerns are brought to the fore. That's not to exclude any of the other relevant sustainability matters, including access to retail and other matters. I think the other grounds for refusal would be with regards to the countryside location. I am concerned that the scale of what is being proposed here is very different to some of the applications that we have considered for development, to permit development in the countryside, involving far fewer numbers of properties. You're talking here about a substantial development in countryside, and as the officer report has suggested, if this site was to be developed in the countryside, it doesn't meet any of the criteria for exceptions. So I would suggest that those initially, at least, are the two main reasons or areas for framing our any recommendation for refusal.
And can I ask, before you ask for a second of that motion, I think we're going to need to summarise it a bit. Yeah, I was going to suggest, if you'd accept the summary, the wording that we've got in front of us that was applied to 230201, this the small Steinhurst about the site not being suitable because of future occupiers having a high dependency on motor vehicles, etc.
That would be.
I think that captures the essence of our sustainability concerns. I think we may take also the point about this would have a very negative impact on home to school transport requirements. I think we should be called that, even if it's not an immediate direct planning policy issue. I'm not convinced about CP11 because, I mean, most of the SDLs are development in the countryside, to be honest. And I think that's where we will run into grounds with the housing supply numbers. But if the members feel we want to include that, I think the case for this is about sustainability, and I think it's succinct and focused. I'd suggest we go with that, but I'm willing to.
I absolutely agree that that paragraph is perfect in terms of I had sustainability with 3 subheadings: transport, shopping, and education. But that really encapsulates transport. I was gonna say CP11, CP9 by virtue of size and scale. But I will take guidance from Brian and Mark on, because if this does bounce back and we go to appeal, these folk here will be involved in that, I'm sure, and we will have to defend that, and we're going to need put our best foot forward.
Can I ask the team to comment on that?
Yeah. So with regard to the sustainability or lack of sustainability, I think that's quite clear. And just to kind of recap what's just been discussed there: access to local services and facilities under 3 key headings, which would be transport, education, and retail. I do need members to clarify whether the home to school transport fund was something you wanted specifically referenced. Within that, my advice would be that education being listed as part or consisting of local facilities, there would be the opportunity, as part of any justification statement of case, should the application be appealed, for the council to put forward all relevant evidence under each topic. And again, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, but the basket of factors which go into sustainability will no doubt be explored at length. Again, specifically referencing that may not give us sufficient wriggle room, hypothetically, if the application was refused on that basis.
So on that basis, are we prepared to accept the recommendation from the officers? Sorry,
we just got one other.
I think it was in terms of I think Councillor Mickleborough mentioned countryside, and it's what Councillor Smith said as well. It's just kind of differentiating between the impacts on the character appearance of the landscape and countryside and a policy question about scale, and whether just trying to decipher what was being sort of put forward.
Before you got to scale, could we have, by virtue of the bulk and scale, mass and size, contrary to CP11 and 9, or would you drop off the CP11 and 9?
If you think there's a breach of a policy, even if you think it's slight, it should be included. Just to clarify the point about countryside and SDLs, there is a slight policy difference in that areas designated in SDL do have another policy consideration under the SDL policies that a site outside of it doesn't. So as you'll be aware, there have been sites put forward where they do conflict with CP11, but they do draw support from SDL policies, and that's sort of some of the nexus of how they work. So I think from the deliberation, it sounds like sort of a harm to the countryside is essentially 1 point, and Scow is another. It's just whether they're together or whether they're separate issues.
If I jump in also, councillors, I guess there's a principal issue we're discussing, is the principle of it is in conflict with the spatial strategy as it currently stands. Inappropriate development of the countryside, location, scale, but then there is also impact. We're talking, if you're talking physical scale, visual impact, landscape harm, that is something slightly different from the principle being in conflict with the spatial strategy. And it sounds like there's a number of issues there that we talk countryside. In principle, it is outside settlement. It is not an allocated site in the current local plan. It is in conflict with CP11, as we've acknowledged. That is a principal issue before we go on to assessing what is on site.
Yeah, I think that works well. I mean, we will need to sort of agree the final wording, but I think you've given us good guidance. I think we're saying that really sustainability is the foremost objection, but I don't think those other ones are nearly as robust as the question of sustainability. But yes, let's put them in. Okay. So given those amendments, I'm not going to try to repeat them all verbatim, but I think we know where we're going. Andrew has proposed that we refuse this application based on those discussion points. Is that in order, Madeline, in terms of what you heard so far? And I will look at Lindsay and Rachel. Yes. Yep. Okay.
Sorry, can I just get, I do need to be quite clear on this, because before we go to any vote, just to recap what I believe officers have heard is that there is obviously a clear sustainability reason for refusal, and that I think we're comfortable with. We have two other issues about principle of development being contrary, in terms of it being located in the countryside, okay, and it being of a scale that is inappropriate. Then we have, and this is where I need the assistance of members here just to clarify what their thought process is, the scale bulk of the scheme. Can members just clarify to us that third, what we believe would be a third reason for refusal, or whether that is integrated in with the second?
Disproportionate, sorry, I think we're saying it's disproportionate to the size of the existing settlement. I will ask members of the public to bear with us, you understand the complications of this process and that we have to do this right.
So then, okay, to phrase it a different way, are members concerned with the unplanned loss of countryside, which an unplanned loss of countryside in principle, and then separately to that, the scale of the development?
Underlined by the sheer size of this in comparison to the village, this 40% increase, and that's where I come in as size and scale.
So that fundamentally is the scale which is inappropriate. Yeah. Okay, so just to recap, then we have sustainability as discussed and understood with those points. We then have the loss of countryside, contrary to policy. And then we have the scale of the proposed development in relation to the settlement for which it's adjoining. Okay, I think we've officers have noted that.
Okay, so taking what he said, Andrew has proposed that on that basis we refuse this application. Do I have a seconder? Wayne has seconded that. So can I ask those who agree with the motion, with the decision that we refuse this application, please to show your hands. Thank you. Those who disagree with this, what's the negatives here? Those who disagree with us opposing this motion. So we have one abstention. Okay, in that case, we have agreed to refuse this application. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, sorry, just 1 second, please. Sorry.
So, members of the committee, just to make you aware that those agreed reasons for refusal would need to include the standard section 106 reason for refusal. So you would have in effect 4 reasons, the 3 we've discussed plus the 4th. Yeah.
I'm just going to call for a quick adjournment of the committee to allow people to leave here and in the main chamber. Stuart Dunham Runner. Until all committee members are present, because otherwise he'll not be allowed in the room. Right. Thank you all for your patience for waiting until the last item on the agenda. I apologise, but as you'll have noticed, it isn't as easy and straightforward as you all might wish it was. So we now move to agenda item 61, which is application 231094, land at 69 King Street Lane, Winnersh. And we have Helen, who's you there? Oh, you're there. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So application 231094 is to the rear of 69 King Street Lane and includes the property itself. So this application is an outline application for up to 28 dwellings with landscaping, open space following the demolition of existing buildings and outbuildings. And although it doesn't specifically say in this description that those buildings that are outbuildings form part of a builder's yard, and only access is to be considered. All other matters are reserved as it's an outline application. The application offers a 40% affordable housing contribution within those 28 dwellings. So this is the application site outlined in red, and the property, I don't know how well the cursor works, it's a bit below. So this is the property 69 King Street Lane here to be demolished, and its garden runs down this line here and includes that area. And this part here with these buildings is a builder's yard, which does actually, not shown on this line drawing, extend a little bit further into the field than this, but we'll be able to see on the aerial imagery on the next slides. This access here is the existing access, which serves both 69 and the builder's yard as it exists. So the site is located in the countryside, which is the green area on the plan. The access is in the limited development location of Sindlesham. And this purple area to the north is the settlement of Winnersh. This is the motorway going along between the two. So the proposal, although it is in the countryside location, is considered to be within a sustainable location. It adjoins the settlement limit of Sindlesham, and although part of it is in the countryside, there are local facilities nearby. You've got the Winnersh Sainsbury's just up here in the purple area, obviously beyond this map. We've got Bearwood Recreation Ground and the Community Hall of Winnersh down here. So this is the aerial imagery where you can see the existing development on the site. Builder's yard here, and this sort of slightly greener area was where the garden runs of 69 King Street Lane. Then this remaining area here with the trees in is an open field at the moment. This plan is the indicative layout, just a reminder that it is outlined with only the access. So it just shows an approximate layout that could be an option, but obviously these parts are all reserved matters. The two TPO trees which are shown here, and these trees down here that are TPO'd are to be retained, and there is the boundary hedgerow on these sides, which is also to be retained. So this is standing within the field. This fencing that you can just about see here is fencing is round the TPO tree in the centre. This big property here is 69 King Street Lane, and there's a post and rail fence denoting its garden. And the closed boarded fence is where the builder's yard sits. These are some of the buildings and outdoor storage areas as part of the builder's yard, which is to be demolished as part of the scheme. And then this is the open part of the field looking south, and this hedge boundary here that you can just see in the dark area is where the site ends. So as we've heard previously, when applying the tilted balance in paragraph 11 of the MPPF, we've identified limited harm in the officer's report. The main harm here that has been identified is obviously the loss of this open field, which is only part of the site, and it is close to the settlement boundary. And there was an objection from the conservation officer in terms of an impact on the setting of the conservation area, which again in part relates to loss of the green space that surrounds the conservation area. However, weighing this up under paragraph 11, there are significant benefits associated with the proposal, including the housing provision within a sustainable location. And the application is recommended for approval subject to the conditions set out in the report, some of which have been revised in the supplementary report, and a section 106 agreement. I note that the recommendation doesn't include authorisation for refusal in the event that the section 106 is not signed within the 6-month period, but that should be included as part of the recommendation. Thank you.
Helen, thank you very much for that really succinct presentation. We have, again, a number of speakers, some in the room, some not. The first on my list is Councillor Paul Fishick speaking on behalf of Winnersh Parish Council rather than as a borough councillor. He's speaking online. Paul, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you. You're speaking against the application. You have 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and for allowing me to speak to the Planning Committee. Firstly, I refer the number of objections from local residents set out in the report covering pages 211 to 216. Many references are similar issues to which I wish to raise this evening. The first is traffic. The B3030 King Street Lane is a road that is already over capacity with queuing traffic northbound from around 7:45 a.m. until 9:15 a.m, which is compounded by queuing traffic southbound from around the same time, impacting on Bearwood Road, where a primary school and a nursery school is located, and New Road, where Reedham College is situated. Further congestion and queuing takes place every evening from around 1500 hours in both directions, extending past 1800 hours. Additional traffic from the net gain 27 dwelling development with 56 allocated parking spaces will only exacerbate what is already a difficult situation for residents and the wider travelling public, and increase harmful emissions into the air that affect residents. My next point is about walking distances and buses. The walking distances quoted on page 226 under paragraph 38 have been taken from the access at King Street Lane of the development and not the centre. An additional 200 metres minimum needs to be added. As an example, a walk from Sainsbury's front door would take around 15 minutes, including the crossing of Winnersh Relief Road. No disrespect to officers, but please don't be fooled by the contents of paragraph 41. There is no bus stop and no regular bus service. a shopper bus operates along King Street Lane on a Tuesday at 10:45, returning from Sainsbury's at 12:02. That's it. No further buses until next Tuesday at the same time. Also, more time is required to get to Winnersh Station, which falls outside the Chartered Institute of Highways Engineers and Manual for Streets guidance on walking. Sustainability has been mentioned this evening, and this development, in my view, is not sustainable, with all the development's traffic joining the already congested King Street Lane mentioned earlier. My final point is about foul sewage. There appears to be no
Paul, I'm going to ask you to
reference-
make sure it's a fairly brief point because you are now over
It is.
time. Thank you.
There appears to be no reference to the discharge of foul sewage. It is understood that the foul sewage system within King Street Lane is already at capacity, and Thames Water system connects to St Mary's Road. And I'm dealing with a current live issue with a history with Thames Water, where certain properties suffer raw sewage surcharging into their gardens and they are unable to flush their toilets.
Paul, I'm going to have to ask you to finish there if you may, please. You've now had
Thank you very
more
much.
than your
I've
3 minutes.
made the points. Thank you.
Thank you. We now have 3 residents who wish to speak, Justine McDonald, Deirdre Edwards and Keith Palmer. It's only going to be one of you speaking, is it? That makes it much easier. Thank you for that. This sounds a bit like Mastermind, but you also have 3 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity to present the local residents' objections to the proposed development at 69 King Street Lane. This is the 4th planning application for this site, and whilst the key difference is 40% social housing, it does not mitigate the key issues and concerns raised by a broad range of local residents. Indeed, since the previous decision not to approve planning for additional housing on this site, there has been significant increase in traffic due to increased houses in the local area and instances of flooding and effluent in surrounding properties. 38 residents have posted objections and a local petition received over 200 signatures against the development. Local residents' main concerns are impact on traffic and pedestrian safety, including access, increased incidence of flooding and sewage, increased pressure on local services and infrastructure, and the detrimental impact on wildlife and on the privacy and livelihood product. There is severe traffic congestion at peak times, leading to standing traffic in both directions. Increasingly, traffic is now stationary throughout the day past the proposed development, post the introduction of the new traffic lights to support Hatch Farm dairies. Older mews are already impacted with school parking, preventing residents from leaving the close, and this will happen at the proposed site. There is significant primary school pedestrian traffic on the resident side of King Street Lane, including scooters, bicycles and prams, which face increased risk of accidents. The bellmouth at the proposed entrance does not provide sufficient turning circles for larger vehicles entering and exit the site, and there is concern that the proposed width of the access will not allow vehicles to pass each other, impeding oncoming traffic in both directions. Vehicles exiting the proposed development turning left will need to cross the entrance of the adjacent 73 King Street Lane to prevent crossing into the other side of the road. The submitted road safety audit itself identifies pedestrian vehicle conflicts if the boundary fence is retained. The boundary belongs to 73 King Street Lane. Indeed, the image of access submitted shows the turning across 73 access, and there are concerns that pedestrians will have to stop directly outside the access to cross the road. You can see pictures here of a van actually crossing 73 King Street Lane access curb, and that was with a pedestrian actually standing on the corner. You can also see stationary traffic in both directions with a cyclist in the middle of the road and school children walking to school with increased exposure to CO2 emissions. This is a daily occurrence. Another key concern of residents is the increased pressure on an already broken sewage system. You can see the photos of flooding in King Street Lane and the back of older mews in the proposed site. St Mary's Road is at the beginning of the sewer run and has had 3 instances of a raw sewage in the property and outside the property. And Thames Water have failed to provide a systemic fix. Conversationally, they believe an additional 28 houses on the existing sewer will worsen the situation. There are also examples of raw sewage on properties in King Street Lane, which cannot be underestimated the massive impact this has on people's health and mental well-being. We request that you decline this application in recognition of the below and all the comments submitted online. Boom, 3 minutes.
I don't know how many times you rehearsed that, but well done.
Quite a few times.
Okay. We now have Adam Constantino, who is the agent who is here, and will be
What about
speaking.
me? Don't I get
hold
to
on.
go, David? I've registered to speak against.
You do, but not yet, Prue.
Oh, really?
Not on
I
my
thought it was
not on my
next.
list. You don't. You come next. I'm told off by the half boss now.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. This outline application for the erection of up to 28 dwellings is the result of a collaborative approach to placemaking that has benefited from an extensive dialogue with your officers and statutory consultees. The scheme has also been subject to a pre-application consultation with residents, which took the form of a postal mail drop inviting them to comment on the proposals. And we'd like to thank everybody for their input into the design evolution of this scheme. This is exactly the type of high quality development encouraged by the NPPF, and one that accords with the design and development management policies of the adopted core strategy, the Managing Development Delivery Local Plan, as well as the content of the Council's Design Guidance SPD. The scheme secures a wide range of benefits, including the provision of up to 28 high quality and energy efficient dwellings, the reuse and improvement of brownfield land, on-site provision of 40% affordable housing, which in this instance would be up to 11 dwellings, policy compliant levels of residential and visitor parking, including associated electrical vehicle charging points, retention of boundary trees and a landscaping scheme that includes a defensible boundary to the southern boundary of the site, integrated into the overall scheme design with a commitment to maintaining and retaining and enhancing the existing TPO trees by way of additional tree planting. A layout that respects and maintains the amenity of neighbouring properties, whilst also providing ample amenity space for future residents. Importantly, there have been no technical objections from the Council's statutory consultees in relation to highways, drainage matters, or ecological matters, as well as tree and landscape matters. The heritage and local resident concerns have been comprehensively addressed in your officer's report. Overall, the scheme has been sensitively designed to respect the prevailing character of the surrounding area, including the Sindlesham Conservation Area to the west of the site. To conclude, this outline plan application is an inherently sustainable location and results in a sensitively designed and high quality development that is a result of a collaborative approach to placemaking. As the application is submitted and outlined, it is only the principle of development and the details of the access that you are considering this evening. The scheme parameters secure an appropriate design scheme, and you will retain control over the detailed design matters which are to be considered at reserved matter stage, and which again will be subject to scrutiny from your officers and members of this committee. It is for these reasons that you are invited to determine this outline planning application in accordance with your officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam, for that. And again, thank you for being so concise. Prue, now is your moment, if you're still there.
I am still here. Sorry, David. I just thought all the objections went first. That's my mistake. Better you start on my 3 minutes before you tell me off for overrunning. And I'm here.
Your 3 minutes will start now. Okay.
Thank you. I'm mopping up all the other problems with the application. So this site was in the local plan update, which was consulted on early in 2022. And as we've heard this evening, we haven't heard the outcome of that yet. But I do note that it's crept up to 28 units now from 25 in the LPU. And I still agree with what was in the LPU, and I quote, "The proximity of the Sindlesham Conservation Area requires sensitivity, and also that a landscape buffer, not a defensible boundary, a buffer, is needed to help the transition between this new housing and the countryside." As well as the relationship with the conservation area, I was concerned then, and still am, that unless any new development is designed to close off the opportunity for further encroachment into the countryside, there's a distinct risk that it would open up the land behind the conservation area and across as far as Sadler's End for further development. So this application came with an indicative layout that doesn't seem to facilitate further expansion into the countryside. But in the revised conditions in the supplementary agenda, the indicative plans have been withdrawn from condition 2. And I think that means you have no idea what might come back in terms of layout at reserve matters once the principle of development has been agreed to. And it will be hard to resist approval at reserve matters when the principle has already been agreed. And secondly, the access. Now, paragraph 117 in the report describes the wider access road that's required, but you have no drawing that shows how close the road will come to numbers 67 and 73 King Street Lane. And while a lot of other impacts like noise and overlooking can't be dealt with tonight because this is an outline application, I think you do need to assure yourselves that the access road can be delivered without harm to the neighbouring properties, and I don't think it can be. And finally, if you nevertheless approve the application, it appears that instead of the council adopting the roads and green space and so on, a management company might be set up. Now, to me, that's simply a wheeze by developers to avoid having to pay a commuted sum to the council for maintenance. Instead, the costs fall to future residents of the development. And we know from past experience in the borough that this practice inflicts large ongoing service charges on residents, but also risks the roads and green spaces and so on not being brought up to the agreed standard before the developer walks off the site. So please, can the committee look into what can be done to prevent this option being available to the developer? Thank you.
Ruth, thank you. And again, double thanks for being well within your time. Before we start committee questions, we just need to record who attended the site visit last week. And again, I think it was the same as for Trails Lane at the time. So everybody except Bill, except Wayne, and except Rochelle. Rochelle is aware of the site. Yeah. Okay, so into people who wish to question or speak, or Bill first, then Rochelle. Okay, well, the board member has spoken, but that's fine. Rochelle, you can speak as the board member. Sure, we'll all get to everybody in the end.
I drove down this afternoon. I drove down Robin Hood Lane. It took me 40 minutes to get from about where my main road comes out to King Street Lane, approximately to the Reading Road. I was going that way, and the traffic was backed up all the way to. I'm looking out and going, it's backed up all the way to the motorway, practically. And I went another direction. All I can say is there's a lot of traffic on this road. There's always a lot of traffic on this road. There is no way you can take more traffic on it at this point. That's a simple fact. It is in a countryside, which some people seem to like to maintain, and I think it should be maintained, but not with homes on it. It's just going to cause problems. I'm not quite sure where all the children are going to go to school. You're wondering about that because both of the schools in the area are pretty much full at this point. So you're going to have more homeschool transport problems as well. I just don't think this is a good site for that at all. And I'm more bothered by what Prue was saying about where are they going to put the homes and how many more are they going to try to stick on there in the reserved matters, which I think is most likely going to happen. This is not a sustainable site. This is not a good site. Put it someplace else. And the sewage problems are happening in a few of the developments. I'm not going to explain where they are happening right now because I don't want the residents to get upset, but it's a problem with sewage in this area. We've got to do something about it. Thames Water, well, Thames Water is full of something, but I'm not going to say what.
That's wise because we do have legal representation here. Good I
think the key point to note is that the reserve matters permission can't be more houses than is in the outline. So it's up to 28 and it can't be any more in the reserve matters. So 28 would be the maximum, and it could be less because it says up to. I mean, that's really up to what comes forward at reserve matters, but it can't be more than that number.
I'm sure the question is going to come from somebody else. So before I go to Bill, I'm just going to repeat one of Rochelle's questions. This question of sewage and the report from Thames Water, I mean, this is something we're not able to judge. So I presume you have got some
Thames
technical.
Water didn't provide any comments on the application.
Can I also jump in on that? Not only did Thames Water not provide comments, but all water utility companies under the Water Industry Act have a legal obligation to connect new development to a public sewer and do the necessaries if that requires, because it's a separate legislative regime, if that requires upgrades to infrastructure, then that is something the developer and the utility company need to come to an agreement on, and there are separate consent processes for that outside of planning. The item you heard earlier did have a condition on there, Grampian condition. That doesn't detach, or having that Grampian condition doesn't prevent a developer from still needing to do that under the Water Act 1991. So this right to connect effectively removes the council's ability to withhold development for sewage capacity issues.
Okay, thank you for the clarity on that, Brian, though I feel we may yet return to it. I've got Bill, then Andrew. Michael.
I think perhaps mine may have been answered is about the drainage. The residents' spokesperson showed photographic evidence that there is a problem on both foul and surface water. But then the agent said that there was no objections or concerns raised by our drainage experts. So it just strikes me that somebody's not coming up with the truth. There is a problem.
And there were no objections from the WBC drainage officer on surface water drainage. That the foul water drainage would be outside their remit. That would be a matter for Thames Water, but they chose not to comment.
They not flag it up then, you know, just to say there isn't a problem.
Usually, if they don't have any comments, they either don't provide a comment or Thames Water. They tend to usually provide a comment if they have something to say.
I've got Andrew.
Yeah, I have 2 or 3 questions. And firstly, I'd like to return to the matter of Thames Water and sewage. I think that it's worrying, that Thames Water, as a statutory consultee, haven't submitted, any comments. Thank you, Brian, for your explanation, of the relevance of the Water Act 1991 in this situation. My question is very specific, okay, particularly given what are reported as existing sewage problems in the area. Is it possible to include some sort of condition, that development will not proceed, until fit for purpose sewage provision is made? So that's the first question.
Thank you, Andrew. In answer to the question, yes, absolutely. The committee has the ability, and in many other larger applications, Thames Water may well suggest a Grampian condition that is put on to allow the local authority, or remind the developer, that they need the agreement of the utility company, in this case Thames Water, and normally that would be prior to occupation, that agreement, required infrastructure is undertaken, and that would be to accommodate additional demands to serve the particular development. We have standard wording for that. Could read it out in verbatim to you if you wish, but it's a standard condition that we get happy to put on.
Thank you. And that's called a granting condition, is it?
It's called a Grampian condition, which is requires something to be done before something else happens. In effect.
Okay, so I'm sure that's something which we would wish to come back to. My second question is the nature of the existing site. Would it be true to describe a proportion of this site as being brownfield?
Sorry, Andrew, could you just repeat the last part of that?
Yeah, is it accurate to describe a proportion of this site, particularly specifically the builders' yards and the house that would be demolished as brownfield?
So the builder's yard would be classified as brownfield, but existing residential and residential gardens are excluded from the definition of brownfield. Therefore, if you're considering the brownfield part of the site, that would be the builder's yard only. And the rest is greenfield or residential already.
Good. Thank you for that clarification. And my final line of questioning, it pertains to, I think it was Councillor Bray's comments about the planting of a landscape buffer between the site and the conservation area. I do see what I perceive to be some evidence, of such a buffer in the drawings provided. But could you just elaborate exactly what is envisaged there, given that we're talking about an adjoining conservation area?
Sure. So the landscape buffer was that Councillor Bray mentioned was something that was referred to in the local plan update. It's not specifically mentioned by the applicant in this application. The indicative plan does show quite a lot of planting on those boundaries, but obviously that is the indicative plan. So on the basis that after the site visit, when we did observe those boundaries and they were brought up as a concern, condition 29 was amended in the supplementary report to specifically include the hedgerows and trees on the boundaries that they had to be retained. In terms of a buffer, as we've still got an indicative site and we're only talking about the number of dwellings here and the access, we don't know what's going to come forward yet. It could be something that we could incorporate into a landscaping scheme if that was felt necessary, either in amending a condition or adding an additional condition requiring a buffer. But obviously that will only really come back with the reserve matters when we know the layout and how the site is going to look.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Just really follow on my comments at the last planning committee meeting, where it would be useful to have the full reasons from the highways officer and indeed any other WBC officer rather than no objections. Because as I think other people mentioned, King Street Lane itself is an extremely busy road. I think as Councillor Fisher was saying, particularly during certain times of the day, and it would be difficult to get onto and out of this site, especially right-hand turns. So it would be great to have some more commentary on that, indeed from any other officer. I mean, no comments really is not very useful whatsoever. Thank you.
That's fine. We can include full consultee comments in future, but often they aren't much more comprehensive than that. But Gordon is here and I'm hoping that he'll be able to answer any traffic-based questions for you.
Basically, as set out in the supplementary report, the 28 houses would generate somewhere in the region of 17 and 15 two-way movements per AM or PM period, which is the hours we normally assess. When you look at King Street Lane, you're looking about over 700 two-way movements in each peak. When we're assessing in transport terms, we assess impact of 17 against 750. The normal rule of thumb is there's that 10% daily variation. And in this case, it's only 2%. In highway terms, on the assessment of purely numbers, highways, which is done not just here in Woking, but nationally, it would be a minimal impact for that level of traffic.
Yeah, can I just sort of come on that? I mean, particularly, it's not always the numbers, it's the difficulty of trying to navigate a road like that. And then, as well, I've driven along that road many, many times, and I try to avoid it if I can. but I'm concerned about right-hand turns because that's usually where the issues are, which is going to make it difficult. So some commentary on that would be great. And if it could be not in a supplementary agenda, but in a main agenda, that would be even better because it gives us more time to actually read it and try to understand it. Because I do read everything. It does take me a heck of a long time, but I do get through it. So I would like to understand that.
Thank you, Michael. Just a couple of points there on inclusion of comments in committee reports. I mean, as members will know, this agenda is over 250 pages long for 4 items. We often receive quite lengthy consultation comments. To include them in writing within even an appendices or within a document would instantly make this document double its size. They are all available for public access viewing on the council's website. Well, they are once a determination is made, but they can be viewed publicly on the public file if you need to view them. The most important point is that officers do their very best to summarise what are quite a lengthy list, you know, in many cases dozens of consultation responses for members. If there is an issue, for example, a consultee, technical or otherwise, raise an objection, that should and normally is covered in some detail within the report. And the reports do contain, as in this case, the highway section is quite lengthy. It does consider all the issues that are relevant, bearing in mind that no objection has been raised. We obviously have transport colleagues here present for you on the evening to ask questions to. And if there is any updates or information that is requested of us or that comes to us between publishing that report almost 2 weeks in advance of committee, the supplementary update is the mechanism for us to capture those updates. It will be an impossibility that we are able to include everything because time doesn't stop a week and a half, 2 weeks before committee. So therefore the supplementary will always have a purpose in presenting whatever information we feel you as members need to know about. So just to clarify that, I do appreciate the points though.
Just one more point on this one. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate, synopsis, a summary of it is absolutely great. But if you could say for the full report or full details, refer to wherever that is, that would be useful as well. Just if it's on the website, go to the website under whatever it is, just to direct us. That would be useful. And I'm sure that shouldn't be, it won't produce a really chunky report, but it would be certainly helpful. It also always make our reading a lot longer, but at least it will probably stop some questions. Thank you.
Yeah, now I've got you down, I'm just a sense, I just want to pick up particularly on Michael's point. Brian, I understand what you're saying, but with regards to traffic reports, we have been here before. It is one of those things that takes up an awful lot of committee time to discuss, and that if we can help add clarity to those discussions in advance without producing an extra 500 pages in the officer report, that would be good. I'm probably going to get reminded for saying this somewhere else, but I note that Paul Fishick, speaking on behalf of Winnerd Parish Council, is also the exec member for Highways, and it would be good if there was at least some convergence between his views and the Highways team in terms of whether there's a traffic issue on this application or not. Perhaps that's one for outside. Picking up on some of the points that Andrew made, I would endorse entirely the point that he and Prue made about the security of the boundaries around that site, as in it is this site only and not opening up potential elsewhere. And I think the provision of the maintenance of those boundaries, which we discussed during the site visit, is absolutely key. I'm glad that they're in there, Helen, and that's good, but we need to make sure that stays. That for me is a critical issue. I mean, broadly, I support this application. I think I would disagree with Captain Fisher. I think it is actually more sustainable than most we've actually seen coming through. There is a Sainsbury's store, albeit 10 to 15 minutes walk down the road, but it's there. There are transport links. It's largely at least in part brownfield, and it does fit in nicely alongside the existing settlement boundary. And in what is frankly a largely urbanised area anyway, and it isn't that I can see it visibly closing gaps between other settlements. I'm still concerned about this sewage issue because we've got Thames Water saying all is well, and we've got photographic evidence saying all is not well. And while we aren't plumbing and drainage experts, I can't help but feel it's remiss of us to approve an application where there's very clear evidence that there's already an existing problem. And I don't know how we resolve that conundrum because I can't judge on it, but I feel discomfort over it. Perhaps that's one we'll return to at the end. Al?
Yeah, I was just going to ask about paragraph 117, access. I mean, as we said, it's outside Bearwood School in the afternoon, complete gridlock. If there was more active travel, if more people were walking to school, that'd be great. But I mean, if you look at drawing 21-029/004, which shows the access to the site, basically getting rid of the pavement. So pedestrians being turned into second-class citizens by this, because you're basically removing the pavement and putting in a road, and the give-way line is right up on the road. Couldn't it be put back behind the pavement so that the pedestrians actually can maintain their priority that they currently have? (21-029/004). It's not in the pack though.
I mean, I admire your sentiment now, but I'm not sure how it differs from any other road intersection.
Yeah, it's very difficult because if you push the stop line back, you affect visibility space. And there are many other examples throughout the borough and other local authorities where the stop line is at the edge of the carriageway. The level of traffic isn't large coming out of this site. There will be the drop curves and tactile paving included in any design of the access, which has been secured by condition. And what we're looking at is an access that's already there, but maybe not used less by construction vehicles, but by cars, and maybe a bit more friendly to pedestrians.
I mean, my point is that you've got 700 cars and is it an hour going up this road. I mean, coming out of this site with 28 houses, possibly, I mean, there's going to be a queue of cars, aren't there? And so pedestrians are just going to be blocked by cars queuing out of this site every morning.
Michelle?
Also, the only two roads to school require them to cross the Winnish Relief Road or the Reading Road, neither of which is particularly good. And if you'd like to go down and see the King Street Lane and the Reading Road and King Street Lane and the Relief Road, you can usually find that about on a weekly basis, somebody's taken out some of the furniture there. They've knocked out one of the signs, they've knocked out one of the barriers, they've knocked out one of everything on a regular basis. Most people who live in Woolwich have seen that enough that I think the sign person likes me now because I keep telling him there's another one down. I don't know how to say it any other way. It's not a really sustainable site as far as that goes. Yes, there's a Sainsbury's there, but if you want to cross the street and want to go across King Street Lane, unless you go all the way up to Sainsbury's and walk across at the light, and that's about the only way you can get across there at that time. I deliver the road on an occasional basis, and it's an interesting experience trying to cross the road there in a few places. I wouldn't advise it normally if you like to keep your body attached and all your limbs attached, but that's me.
Wayne?
Yeah. Can I just go back a moment to look at the settlement boundary? And I'm particularly, I didn't go on the site visit. I went to the entrance and I've Googled from satellite this site, and it's just like what you've got in here. So the settlement boundary between Winnersh, could you show us, Helen, where the settlement boundary in Winnersh and Sindlesham, and I'm particularly interested in where the conservation area comes. You were talking about it when you were doing your presentation. I would quite like you to get your cursor and just show me where the two lines.
All along this side, and then cuts through the middle. Where it says the residential.
Okay. And where's the definition between Winnersh and Sindlesham on there? Could you just show me? Oh, okay. Right. And so older Mews. Yeah, I can see it on there. So that development is back garden development, isn't it? How many? And I know I asked you earlier, but just for the benefit of everyone else, the part that would be classed as brownfield, excluding the main house, is okay. So when you talk about buffers, you're talking about buffers that would take that line. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry. I believe that the buffers that were being referred to earlier were a buffer against the conservation area, which we don't currently have a condition relating to. From the site visit, there was a sort of view to enhance these ones to effectively prevent any further development spreading and keep the countryside character of the area. We didn't particularly discuss any buffer on this side for the conservation area. At the moment, there's no condition relating to that side of the development. It does, if we go back to the photos, you can see here that's just it sort of abuts the back gardens of these properties and the back of the conservation area.
Buffer. When it comes back, if it gets approved, it comes back revised.
It could be form part of the landscaping condition that we will want to buffer, but that we haven't explicitly said so anywhere in the decision, the recommended conditions that would come up in a decision.
And on my list, I've obviously got the Thames water issue, but I've got this issue in my ward, and it's a problem, like it has been over the last 2 weeks, where certain people in hers can't flush their toilets. We know how to fix the problem, but Thames Water ain't got any money. So I don't know how we would fix this, only to build on your point, Andrew, to have that informative in there.
It was a proposed condition.
Sorry, condition. Because I can't see any other way you can deal with it. Because it's all to do with pumping stations. It's nothing else. It's a simple way to fix, but it costs money.
Tony, you've not spoken, so.
I have a question for Gordon. You're saying that the road has something like 700 vehicles an hour going through it outside here. What would the maximum capacity of a road like that be?
The 750 vehicle, I mean, that's two-way. So that's going east-west. You're normally looking, this is off the top of my head, it's a King Street Lane, it's a 2-lane road, 1 lane in each direction. It's, I think, about 5.5, 6 meters. You're probably looking at the region of 700 to 1,000 capacity. However, the capacity of that link is limited by how the King Street Lane junction works. We all know it always has been busy. And that's what limits the capacity of this link of the King Street Lane, even though the theoretical capacity is a bit higher. If I don't want to get too technical, but is that right?
Thanks.
I'm just going to come back with a few comments of my own on this and where we are. I'm conscious of time. I think as a committee, we need to be consistent in what we do. We spent a considerable amount of time discussing our eventual refusal of an application that was 3 times this size out in the countryside, and in the end, the only reason we focused on the issues of sustainability. By comparison, in fact, I find very little comparison, to be honest, between this application and that one. This is in what is already a heavily urbanised area. It's a busy road. We're going to get a few more cars on it, and that sounds a very harsh assessment, but it's true. As we've said many times before, the highways team have a technical view on this that doesn't always equate to public perception. But in the end, a planning inspector will take the highways team's word, I suspect, and not ours. This is also a site that was in the draft local plan update, and we've debated the impact or otherwise of that as we've gone through. But we have to bear that in mind. This is not just a decision about what we want to say in front of people here. We've got to think about, if we were to refuse this application, where it leaves our officers in trying to defend it at any appeal. And if we struggled hard and worked hard to find grounds to help them for that much larger, more rural site, I think this is going to be an order of magnitude different in terms of trying to defend a refusal on this one. I'm very reassured by the comments that have been made about conditions, about the buffering and the protection of the hedgerows and the trees, and I think that's, for me, essential. I'm glad to see that there. Like Wayne, I'm very concerned about this effluent issue, but frankly, I don't know how we can resolve it, other than by putting the condition on that's been suggested. So I kind of feel that, given the fact that this is a brownfield, or at least part brownfield site, and what is already a reasonably urbanised setting, very close to a significant development location, my sort of drift of mind is that we should be approving this. Are there any other further comments on this? I've got Rochelle and I've got Al.
Okay, it took them 27 times to finally get the King Street Lane and the Reading Road traffic signals to work. And even that is on an occasional basis. And if anybody goes through there on a regular basis, they know they always get stuck at it, no matter what happens. There's a lot of traffic on this road. It's a very, very busy road. It's not a country road that you're afraid to put traffic on. This is a busy urban road, but trying to get into Sainsbury's can be a challenge if you want to do that. Coming from that development up into there, trying to turn right into Sainsbury's is difficult. And I think it's not the right place to have these houses. It should be someplace else. And we seem to have decided that was something else, that for other reasons, but it seems to be that certain ones seem to be okay, but certain ones aren't. For similar reasons. And by the way, you can't turn right when you get out, turn right, you can't turn right down the relief road going towards any place. You got to go left and go all the way around and come back out that way. So it's not a very sustainable location.
Okay, Rochelle, thank you. Anybody, there's one other hand out. And then I'm going to, unless there's anything we've missed, I'm going to move to Andrew and that'll be it.
I was just going to ask, so in the local plan update, was this site, the whole of the site proposed here, or was it just the brownfield site?
It was the whole of the site, but it was up to 25 houses rather than the 28 that's proposed here.
We discussed that and brought that in mind. There's no other.
But Rachel, you have an opportunity. If you think you've got enough, based on what we've rehearsed it this evening. If you think you've got enough to build an amendment and go against the officer's recommendation, that's your prerogative, isn't it?
I'll interrupt business at the moment to say we are running up against our timeline. We're going to have to take a vote to extend the meeting just in case we go on a bit further. So I'm going to propose that we extend the meeting by another 30 minutes. Yeah. Would anyone like to second that? Yep. Those in favour? That has been unanimously agreed. We're going for some kind of record tonight. I've lost the plot there. Were you going to? Yeah, Andrew. Yeah.
Yes, it seems as though all of the questions and comments have been made. So I would like to make a proposal, but before I do that, I would like to suggest that we remember that currently, when it comes to reserve matters applications, the committee has decided that reserve matters applications may be delegated to officers or may be returned to the full committee. And I think that this is an instance, in which we would wish for that option to be available. And just a reminder, that all members of the committee, are asked at that stage, whether or not, they would wish the reserve matters application to be returned. So I just wanted to mention that. I would like to propose that we accept the officer recommendation, but I would like 2 additional conditions to be added. The first is the Grampian condition with respect to sewage, and the second would be a condition as a part of a landscaping plan to ensure that there is a robust buffer between the site, the boundaries of this site and the conservation area. So with those 2 additional conditions, I would like to propose that we accept the officer recommendation. Okay.
Sorry, Rochelle, I'm sorry, just from Brian's comment.
Sorry, I just wanted to thank you, Andrew. I just wanted to confirm that the Thames Water condition, just the rough approximate wording just for members' benefit here and now. Obviously, it's a wastewater condition, foul water. It's no development shall be occupied until confirmation has been provided that either foul water capacity exists off-site to serve the development, or 2, a development and infrastructure phasing plan has been agreed with the LPA in conjunction with Thames Water, and then where an infrastructure phasing plan is agreed, no occupation shall take place until it has been implemented in accordance with those agreed works, or 3, all foul water network upgrades required to accommodate the additional development have been undertaken. And then there's obviously additional reasoning and justification. Yeah.
We had this a few years ago upon the Crossfield School. At what point to Thames Water, this is an outline, at what point does Thames Water come back and say it needs to be on site rather than going into main drainage, or are we past that? Are we definite that they will allow this site to go on main drainage?
So, as I said before, the Water Industry Act deals with that. We don't necessarily, as a planning committee, as a local planning authority, have to have a piece of paper from Thames Water saying we'll connect you up to the network. There is a right to connect. So any development has a right to connect to the public sewers for waste. If that requires upgrades, that is something the developer and the provider need to negotiate and agree upon. And if obviously the upgrades are prohibitive or cannot be done, then that is obviously an issue for the developer. The condition just brings that all together for us, and normally a phasing plan. So for example, if upgrades are required, when do they occur? Do they occur on the 10th house? Do they occur on the first house or the last house? It's designed primarily for much larger developments, which you get in phases. So for example, an SDL site with multiple phases will have a lot of these infrastructure related conditions on them.
Yeah, no, it was two things really. That particular site, Thames Water said no connections to the main drainage. On other sites that we've seen around Twyford, etc., they've insisted on pumping stations.
Yeah, a further point just before we move to the vote. Although this is outlined depending upon access, there were concerns raised by Councillor Bray about the width of the access road and the demonstrating it's not doing any harm to the neighbouring properties. If we give this permission tonight, are we therefore approving the details of that access road or just the access onto the highway at King Street Lane?
It's the principle of the access. There is a planning condition, a pre-commencement planning condition that the detailed design of the said access has to be submitted for approval and delivered accordingly.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Okay, so we have a proposal on the table from Andrew that we approve this outline application subject to those conditions that have been noted, and that the full application comes back to this committee for further review. Do I have someone to...
Sorry, on the reserve matters, members have the right, as with every application, to list the reserve matters application, but because it is a reserve matters, it does not automatically come back. But again, if members feel, board members, the committee chair feel, or the exec member feel that it's of such significance and importance, absolutely at liberty to call in, as with any normal application. So we don't remove the right just because it's a different type of application.
Yeah, so I'll note my request as committee chair that comes back to the committee in its detail, please. So we have a proposal from Andrew. Do we have someone to second? Tanya seconded. Can I ask those in favour of approving this outline application? Thank you. Ask for those against. Rachel, I don't ask you to comment at this point. Thank you. 2. Do anybody abstain? Abstain. Therefore, the application has been approved at outline, and we'll come back to the committee for full planning details. Gentlemen, I think that completes the formal business of the meeting. So thank you for your patience and forbearance. I'm just going to ask, having now officially closed the meeting,